Dark Sleep Radio welcomes you to our Fall Asleep to the Unknown series. Tonight, we drift into the enigmatic tale of Roswell, a story woven with strange lights, unexplained wreckage, and secrets whispered beneath the vast New Mexico sky. Let the calm of the desert night wash over you as we explore the quiet moments behind the headlines and the mystery that still glimmers among the stars. Breathe deeply and allow the story to gently guide you toward peaceful sleep. Chapter 1. The Stillness Before the Storm. The New Mexico desert was once a place of profound silence and endless solitude where time moved as slowly as the wind. In the summer of 1947, Roswell was just a quiet expanse, open sky, scrub brush, and dirt roads stretching toward the horizon. Each day, the sun rose with deliberate patience, spilling amber light over dry plains and crooked fences. Sagebrush swayed softly, and the morning air carried the scent of dust and dew. Life here was slow and purposeful. Roswell itself was a modest town, a tiny dot on the landscape where daily rhythms were dictated by work, weather, and hushed conversations at diner counters and feed store shelves. Roughly 75 miles northwest of town, the Foster Ranch nestled into rolling hills like a forgotten corner of the earth. This was home to M. Brazel, a weathered man of few words and steady hands. Mac had spent years tending this land, riding fences and checking windmills, always watching the skies with the casual awareness of someone who'd lived beneath them his entire life. The sky was his familiar companion right up until the moment it wasn't. On July 2nd, a dry stillness hung over the desert like a held breath. Cicadas had fallen silent and distant summer storm clouds flickered with lightning, offering no rain. Past midnight, Mac was awakened by a sound, sharp and strange. It wasn't quite thunder, but something with a metallic edge, as if something massive had torn through the air and shattered the silence. Then nothing. Just the night. Just the stars. He didn't think much of it then. The desert, after all, had its moods, sometimes groaning, sometimes singing. Mac simply rolled over and pulled the covers close. The sun blazed down from a cloudless sky as Mac rode out across the pasture, scanning for cattle as he did every morning. Heat rose in shimmering waves from the earth. Birds circled high overhead. A dry, hot wind carried a faint scent that didn't belong, a burnt metallic trace that caught in the back of his throat. Before long, a strange sight caught his eye. Stretching nearly a quarter-mile wide was a swath of debris unlike anything he'd ever seen. Small metal fragments were scattered like confetti, glinting silver and bronze under the harsh sunlight. Some pieces looked like foil, but when he tried to crumple them, they smoothed out effortlessly and remained unmarked. Other fragments were stiff and lightweight, etched with precise, alien-like symbols that meant nothing to him. Dismounting slowly, his boots crunching against brittle brass, Mac crouched and picked up a length of the material. It was cold, unnaturally so. The fragment flexed in his hand but refused to tear. No screws, no rivets, no signs of human construction were visible. He stood for a long while, hat tipped back, squinting into the light. The entire field seemed strange. Scattered metal, gouged earth, an unnatural silence deeper than it should be. No birds chirped, no cattle grazed nearby. The world felt hollowed out. Gathering a few pieces of the mysterious wreckage, he secured them in his saddlebag and rode back to the ranch house. His thoughts were tangled, but a strange certainty was forming. Something had come down here, something that belonged to no known aircraft, balloon, or weather experiment. That evening, he sat alone on the porch, a cup of cold coffee in hand, watching the horizon. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and fire before surrendering to dusk. Out in the darkening fields, the debris lay scattered beneath the stars, gleaming faintly like fallen pieces of the sky itself. He remembered the sound from the night before, that awful tearing, that hollow quiet, the strange symbols, the unnatural metal, the deep silence of the land. The air felt different now, charged with an unexplained tension. The New Mexico desert stretched out beneath a vast, velvet sky, stars twinkling softly in the endless darkness. Moonlight washed over the barren landscape, casting silver across jagged rocks and windswept sagebrush. Everything was still, quiet enough to catch the faintest whisper of wind or distant coyote call. Just past midnight on July 2nd, 1947, most of Roswell slept soundly, dreams drifting beneath humble roofs. But high above, something was moving. A fiery streak blazed across the heavens, a sudden arc of light tearing through the calm night. Unlike any shooting star, it was bright and fierce. On the Foster Ranch, M. Brazel stirred. An earlier sharp crack had jolted him from sleep. A strange, echoing boom that seemed to rattle the earth itself. Mac rose slowly, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside. The ground was cool beneath his feet. Desert air hung dry and crisp, sage and distant pine lingering in the breeze. But underneath those familiar scents, something different, something alien. The stars above burned impossibly bright in the unpolluted sky. He scanned the horizon, eyes sharp in the moonlight. And then he saw it! A faint glow low on the far edge of the pasture, a distant flicker of fire. Max later stepped out into the cool night. Stars hung brilliant, endless, cold and silent. Wind carried a low whistle through the canyons, and somewhere far off, a coyote howled. Lonely, thin, and distant. Something had happened. Though he couldn't yet articulate it, Mac Brazil understood deep in his bones that whatever had come down from the sky wasn't meant for this world. He stared into the darkness, a sliver of impossible metal in his hand, and whispered to the night, "What the hell are you?" The desert remained unsettled, as if it had taken a breath and not yet let it go. Darkness pressed against the earth as Mac guided his horse forward, the saddle creaking softly in the strange silence. His heart raced with anticipation. A strange glow pulled him toward an unknown destination, pulsing orange behind sparse desert scrub. When he arrived, the landscape had been violently transformed. A black, smoldering crater split the ground open, surrounded by scattered metal fragments that gleamed under moonlight. These pieces were unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Twisted, warped, some still radiating heat. Delicate symbols etched their surfaces, and some fragments seemed almost transparent, shimmering with an internal light. Smoke wisps drifted upward, dancing with the desert breeze. Occasional crackling sounds and shifting debris punctuated the deep silence. Mac dismounted, approaching the wreckage with cautious steps. The metal pieces felt impossibly light yet unbreakable. When he touched a fragment, it was cold and smooth, humming with a vibration so subtle it was almost imperceptible. His mind churned with questions. This was no ordinary aircraft crash. No familiar engines, no standard bolts or wiring. This was something else entirely. Something not of this world. A shiver ran down his spine as wind whispered through desert grasses. He carefully gathered several pieces, tucking them into his saddlebag. By morning, quiet whispers had begun in Roswell. Rumors spread of a flying disc crashed in the desert. The military quickly responded, dismissing it as a simple weather balloon. But those who saw the wreckage, who held those strange fragments, knew differently. Something extraordinary had fallen from the sky that night. Something not created by human hands. The desert would forever bear the mark of this mysterious event. The morning sun rose softly over the New Mexico landscape, painting the endless sky in pale gold and rose. Cool. Still air carried the faint scent of sagebrush, harboring the secrets of the previous night's incredible encounter. A gentle breeze stirred through the tall grasses, weaving murmurs across the desert, awakening from its long, peaceful slumber. At the Foster Ranch, M. Brazel moved quietly, the weight of the previous night's discovery pressing heavily on his mind. The strange metal fragments scorched earth, and crackling otherworldly sound replayed in his memory like fragments of a vivid dream. News spread quickly through Roswell. By midday, neighbors talked in hushed tones over fences and at the local diner. Some dismissed the tale as an exaggeration, another cattle rancher's tall story. Others were gripped by quiet excitement, their eyes alight with wonder and mystery. A small group of townspeople ventured toward the ranch, moving cautiously through dusty fields. They carefully avoided disturbing the scattered evidence. "It looks like nothing we've ever seen," one murmured, holding a slender silvery shard that reflected sunlight in shimmering waves. "What kind of plane could this be?" Another replied softly. "No plane. No pilot could have survived something like this." Rumors began to take root like desert wildflowers after a rare rain. Tales spread of strange lights in the sky, of objects moving too fast to be explained by weather balloons or military tests. Some claimed to have seen glimmers of otherworldly craft in the night sky in the days before the crash, while others whispered of shadowy figures and unexplained sounds in the surrounding hills. Meanwhile, the military was already moving swiftly. Orders had been dispatched from higher command. Soldiers and officers from nearby Roswell Army airfield arrived quietly, their faces set with determined seriousness. Something extraordinary had fallen from the sky, a secret the desert could no longer hide from curious eyes. The mysterious incident near Roswell began with whispers and strange observations. Children spoke of odd shapes moving across the moonlit sky with unnatural grace and speed. Locals murmured about sudden flashes of light near the ranch before dawn and a distant steady humming sound like a massive engine thrumming. The crash site was quickly secured, with tents and barriers keeping curious onlookers at a distance. Major Jesse Marcel arrived early, his calm and composed demeanor belying the extraordinary nature of what he was about to encounter. As he carefully examined the scattered debris, he noticed something fundamentally different about these materials. The components defied typical expectations. Lightweight metals resisted bending. Strange symbols were etched into surfaces. The strength and composition of the materials were unlike anything Marcel had seen in standard aircraft components. With each piece he handled, the mystery deepened. The town of Roswell, accustomed to open skies and wide horizons, found itself caught between skepticism and an emerging sense of wonder. Residents wanted answers, but also feared what those answers might reveal. The official explanation was swift and simple. A weather balloon had crashed, nothing more. Yet as days passed, it became clear that something more complex was unfolding. Witnesses who came forward with accounts of unusual debris or strange sounds were met with dismissal or outright suppression. The military's grip on information tightened, and whispers of a potential cover-up began to circulate. The desert remained silent, patient, but the wind carried soft, insistent murmurs that stirred imaginations and beckoned the curious to listen. Underneath the vast, endless sky, a profound mystery had taken root, and the world was slowly awakening to its potential significance. Beneath the desert's vast stillness, a quiet urgency stirred. Gravel crunched, a generator hummed softly, and officers exchanged clipped morning orders. Marcel felt something different in the air, a subtle current that resonated deep in his bones. Years of intelligence work had taught Marcel to be observant, soft-spoken, and meticulous. He knew how to read the unspoken, the hesitations, the subtle shifts in stories under pressure. His instincts were sharp, and this morning they were signaling something unusual. Around dawn, a report had come in about an unexpected discovery on a remote ranch northwest of Roswell. A rancher had found scattered debris with strange materials and unfamiliar symbols. Local law enforcement was perplexed. Whatever this was, it defied their usual understanding. Marcel listened intently during the briefing, absorbing every detail without interruption. When it concluded, he carefully folded the note and tucked it into his jacket. "I'll go myself," he stated. The Jeep was already prepared. As he drove from the base onto the open road, the engine's hum merged with the landscape's profound silence. The desert unfolded around him, endless, broken only by scattered fences, dry riverbeds, and a hawk circling shadow. Morning light stretched long shadows across the terrain, and a gentle wind moved through mesquite and tumbleweeds. His mind raced through possibilities during the long drive to Foster Ranch. Experimental aircraft? A downed satellite? Perhaps a new Soviet surveillance device? Yet none of these explanations felt right. The sheriff's and rancher's descriptions carried a weight that suggested something beyond routine. By the time Marcel arrived, the sun had fully risen, casting a golden curtain across the dry ground. Brazel waited by the fence near the gate, his hat tilted low, arms crossed. A small nod acknowledged Marcel's arrival. "Morning," Mac said simply. Marcel stepped out, extending his hand. "Major Jesse Marcel," he introduced himself. Mac Brazil's voice was dry as the surrounding landscape when he told the intelligence officer from Roswell he'd show him the crash site. They rode on horseback across a windswept pasture where the ground looked torn and disrupted, debris scattered everywhere, glittering under the sunlight in long, uneven trails. Crouching beside a large fragment, Marcel examined the material. It was unlike anything he'd encountered. Thin and metallic like foil, yet impossibly resilient. When he folded it, the piece bent without creasing, instantly springing back to its original shape. No seams, no weld marks revealed its construction. Another shard held intricate symbols, delicate, symmetrical etchings that didn't match any known language. Marcel traced the grooves, realizing they were embedded within the metal itself, not painted or scratched. "What do you make of it?" Mac asked after a long silence. Marcel straightened, the fragment still in his hand. "I don't know," he admitted. "But it's not from anything I've seen before." Hours passed as they collected samples, carefully wrapping each piece in canvas and filling boxes. Marcel made meticulous notes, struggling to find words adequate to describe what he was witnessing. By late afternoon, the Jeep was loaded. Mac watched with narrowed eyes as Marcel secured the strange materials. "You'll be taking it back to the base?" he asked. Marcel nodded, promising only to examine and report his findings. A simple handshake marked their farewell, and Mac disappeared into the shimmering heat. During the quiet ride home, the setting sun painted hills in deep ochres and rust. Marcel's mind raced with unanswered questions about the mysterious object's origin and significance. Instead of heading directly to the base, he stopped at his house. His wife was out, but his young son played in the yard. Marcel called him over, gently handing him a piece of the extraordinary material. "Take a look at this," he said, watching his son's reaction. The sky was surrendering to dusk as Major Jesse Marcel drove back to Roswell Army Airfield. A cool wind swept across the base, carrying the faint sense of grease, sand, and sun-baked concrete. The usual daytime bustle had calmed, replaced by a muted rhythm of soft radio chatter and the distant creak of a supply truck. Marcel pulled the Jeep to a stop near the intelligence office. A tired mechanic raised a hand in silent greeting, which Marcel acknowledged with a quick nod. His mind was elsewhere as he stepped out of the vehicle and moved to the rear where boxes were tied tightly under canvas, protected from dust and curious eyes. He stood for a moment watching the breeze play along the tarp's edges before carefully unfastening the ties. With deliberate care, he lifted the first box and carried it inside the small office. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and a map of the Southwest hung prominently. A single desk lamp cast long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Captain Sheridan Cavett waited, sipping from a steaming coffee mug, his uniform slightly rumpled. "You brought it?" he asked. Marcel simply responded, "I brought it," setting the box down gently. Cavett rose, pushing his mug aside, and together they opened the lid. The dull lamplight fell on the fragments inside. Silence filled the room. Cavett reached down and pulled out a thin metallic strip. He bent it between his fingers, watching in fascination as it effortlessly returned to its original shape when released. Earlier that day, a boy had turned the material in his hands, eyes wide with wonder. "It's like magic," he'd whispered. Marcel had smiled faintly, understanding. "Yeah," he'd murmured, "kind of is." The night sky was now a canvas of stars, scattered like silver dust across the heavens. Whatever had come down hadn't originated from here. Marcel stood outside briefly, looking upward, the cooling air a quiet reminder of the extraordinary day's events. Marcel lifted a second piece, a curved section with dull silver and faint violet tones that shimmered in the light. Its edges were clean and cold. On the inner curve, barely visible, a line of delicate, intricate symbols resembled a language not meant to be read but remembered. Cavett moved to another box and picked up what looked like a beam or support. It was hollow featherlight yet sturdy. They examined the wreckage in silence, their confusion growing heavier with each piece. The materials defied everything they understood about engineering. One piece felt oddly textured, almost like snakeskin, but smooth and cold. Another had a thin membrane stretched across a delicate frame like a wingless structure. No wires, no electronics, no motors or propellers were found. Everything seemed grown rather than built. For over an hour they worked, speaking in low voices and passing pieces between them like fragile relics from another time. "This isn't from any aircraft I've ever seen," Cavett finally said. "It's not from any aircraft anyone's seen," Marcel replied. The room grew warmer under the desk lamp, and still neither man could offer an explanation. Cavett leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "Maybe a high-altitude test vehicle, something experimental, top secret?" Marcel looked at him. "Then why were we never briefed? Why would it crash on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with no retrieval plan? Why the symbols?" Cavett didn't answer. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with meaning. The unspoken thought lingered like a scent. What if it wasn't from here at all? Marcel began repacking the fragments with careful hands, wrapping each piece in cloth and sliding it back into the box. Cavett helped, their work methodical, slow, and reverent. Once sealed, Marcel carried the box to secure storage, locked it, and handed the key to the night watch officer. Without another word, he left the building and walked back to his quarters. The night air was cool and still. Crickets chirped softly in the weeds, and a single spotlight cast a pale beam across the surface. Marcel's mind wandered through the quiet night, images twisting and shimmering before him. Silent stars wheeled overhead, ancient and vast. He thought back to the crash, an object falling through darkness, striking the earth with a soundless impact. It wasn't from here. Not from any country he knew. Not from Earth. This thought lapped at the edges of his consciousness like gentle waves, persistent and haunting. He lay back on his bed, hands folded behind his head, staring at the plain plaster ceiling. The rancher's calm voice echoed in his memory. Children's wide eyes. Cavett's stunned expression. Marcel had moved through the empty lots between buildings like a ghost, his thoughts louder than his footsteps. Now in his quarters, he'd shed his jacket over a chair and poured water he didn't drink. He sat on the bed's edge, boots heavy, hands resting quietly in his lap. The material still felt vivid between his fingers. As sleep approached, one certainty remained. Something had arrived, leaving behind far more questions than answers. Morning broke over Roswell, New Mexico. Warm sunlight spilled across barracks and gravel paths, painting everything in soft amber light. Inside the small public information office at Roswell Army Airfield, a quiet scene unfolded. A corporal typed carefully, metal keys clacking softly. An officer watched intently, brow furrowed as lines were centered on the page. The statement was brief and measured. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday. The intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of a local rancher and the sheriff's office of Chaves County. No explanations, no embellishments, just enough to spark curiosity. By mid-morning, the release had been handed to local press and sent over wire services, setting the stage for what was to come. The flying disc story swept through towns like wildfire. Radios crackled. Conversations erupted in diners, shops, and barber chairs. Disbelief and wild speculation filled the air. At the Roswell Daily Record, the editor stared at the typed statement, reading it multiple times. The headline seemed to write itself. By late afternoon, 5 bold words would be etched into history. AF captures flying saucer on ranch. Phone started ringing off the hook. Some callers buzzed with excitement. Others with skepticism, but everyone was talking. Roswell, typically a quiet town of sun and sand, suddenly found itself at the epicenter of something extraordinary. In the Main Street diner, conversations swirled between bites and sips. Someone whispered about a glowing object. Another mentioned a cousin's friend who saw something streak across the sky like lightning. Maybe it's from Russia, someone suggested. Maybe it's not even from Earth, another replied. Nervous laughter masked a deep undercurrent of unease and curiosity. On the military base, the mood quickly changed. Any initial excitement evaporated fast. Urgent communications came in. The order was crystal clear. Retract the statement. Marcel understood. The mystery had spiraled beyond control. The word disc was already spreading like wildfire. Military leadership wanted to regain narrative control. A new statement emerged. Shorter, more clinical. It claimed the recovered object was simply a weather balloon. Just standard meteorological equipment, misidentified by an overzealous rancher and officer. To reinforce this new story, a carefully staged photograph was arranged. Marcel stood dutifully beside a broken balloon and scattered foil-like material, nothing like what he'd originally collected. Press cameras clicked. The image would circulate nationwide. Headlines transformed. The narrative shifted from excitement to explanation, from mystery to mundane mistake. But for those who had seen the original evidence, Marcel, Embrazol, and a few others, the retraction rang hollow. Marcel sat alone in his quarters, the room dim and lit only by a soft lamp on his desk. A distant radio station played a faint piano ballad, barely audible through static. He removed his cap and rubbed his eyes, thoughts churning with what he had seen. The wreckage haunted him, the impossible metal, the etched symbols, the strange way light bent off its surface, how the material seemed to fold and remember its shape. He recalled his son's wonder holding a piece in their kitchen and Cavitt's wordless understanding of their shared experience. Officially, the matter was closed. The wreckage had been flown to Fort Worth, destined to disappear. No further statements would be made, just another weather balloon explanation. Outside, the desert air cooled. Crickets began their soft chorus. A distant dog barked once, then fell silent. Across Roswell, people turned off radios, folded newspapers, and drew curtains. But before sleeping, many gazed out windows toward the stars, sensing something had passed overhead, something beyond radar or reason. The official silence was already settling like dust, covering the trace of something extraordinary. The next morning, the Foster Ranch awakened quietly. Pale light rose behind hills, turning low clouds, a soft apricot. Birds chirped faintly, and a lone steer bellowed in the distance. Mac Brazel stood outside his small home, hands in pockets, eyes on the horizon. The desert rarely changed, but Mac noticed subtle shifts. That morning, something felt different, a barely perceptible tension that made the hairs on his neck stand up. It wasn't just the lingering memory of the strange wreckage, it was something more. The desert held its secrets, and Mac knew something was off. Wide tire marks pressed deep into the dirt near the arroyo where the wreckage had been, with scattered footprints that didn't belong to him, his horse, or the sheriff's men. Someone else had been there and recently. He hadn't heard a vehicle in the night, but sound could carry strangely in the vast desert. Near the fence line, a few cigarette butts caught his attention. One still held the faint trace of smoke. Mac moved carefully that morning, feeding the animals and checking his pasture's perimeter. The hills around him were empty, but the feeling of being watched hadn't disappeared. By mid-morning, he decided to head into town. Roswell shimmered in the summer heat as he rode in. The streets bustled with activity. Reporters, townsfolk, and men in suits who didn't look like locals. A few waved, but Mac kept his head down, hat pulled low. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside. Sheriff George Wilcox greeted him, noticing a change. The first time Mac had come in, his eyes had burned with curiosity or disbelief. Now, something different filled his expression. Hesitation, caution, maybe even fear. "You got a minute?" Mac asked quietly. They moved to the small office behind the front desk, smelling of leather, paper, and old wood. Mac closed the door and remained standing. "I've been thinking," he began. "Maybe I shouldn't have said nothing." He explained about the tracks on his land, unfamiliar footprints that didn't match any known visitors. A shadow near the well 2 nights ago. Something wasn't right. Wilcox leaned forward, listening carefully. No one had approached Mac's house, but the sense of being watched was unmistakable. Something had changed since he'd brought in that mysterious wreckage. Mac's dog refused to go near the barn, and the sheriff watched him in silence. Will Wilcox leaned in, asking if someone was trying to scare Mac off. Mac didn't want to repeat his story, simply admitting he wasn't telling everything. "Let me know if anyone's snooping," Wilcox said. "We'll keep watch." Mac's gaze wandered, from the floor to the wall, then back to the door. A knock echoed in the main office. Another reporter, drawn by the rumors of Mac's return to town, was eager for details about the strange event that had swept through Roswell like a sandstorm. Near the door, Mac met the well-dressed reporter who greeted him politely with notepad ready. "Mr. Brazel?" he said smoothly. "Would you clarify a few things?" Mac stared at him, then spoke in a hollow voice. "I made a mistake. Found a weather balloon. Didn't know what it was. That's all." When the reporter blinked, Mac quickly added, "The Army said I was wrong. That's all I've got to say." He stepped out into the sun, leaving Roswell as quietly as he'd arrived. Locals watched him go, whispering and speculating. Some thought he'd been warned, others believed he was embarrassed. A few suspected he'd been told to keep quiet. That evening, Mac sat on his porch just like days before. The sun sank behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields. His cattle moved restlessly. An unfamiliar, metallic scent drifted on the wind. Bright stars emerged in the silent sky. Leaning back, hands folded, Mac stared into the night. Whatever had happened, he couldn't explain it, and he sensed no one would ever let him try. At Roswell Army Airfield, the days after the initial discovery passed quietly. But beneath the surface, a different motion was underway, moving in shadows and whispers, seeking not to reveal, but to conceal. Major Jesse Marcel was the first to notice. In the weeks following the incident, an unsettling silence began to descend. The wreckage investigation, once a topic of intense speculation, was now shrouded in secrecy. Marcel noticed the first signs of suppression in the quiet workspaces and hushed conversations around him. Files and evidence started vanishing mysteriously. One morning, Marcel discovered his meticulously prepared report had disappeared without a trace. The detailed account documenting the wreckage, its strange symbols, and inexplicable material properties was simply gone. When he inquired about its whereabouts, colleagues offered only vague, non-committal responses. Personnel movements became equally suspicious. A mechanic who had assisted in unloading the initial crates was abruptly transferred hundreds of miles away, with no explanation or goodbye. The physical evidence followed a similar pattern of erasure. Carefully cataloged metal fragments and delicate materials were systematically removed from secured storage areas. Crates that had been witnessed in specific locations would vanish overnight, leaving behind nothing but emptiness and silence. Documentation met the same fate. Photographs from the first investigation were confiscated or destroyed. Camera operators grew tight-lipped, their expressions revealing nothing. Negatives and prints disappeared from archives as if they had never existed. The suppression extended beyond official channels. Local witnesses who had previously spoken openly about strange lights and unusual sounds now grew hesitant. Neighbors who once joked about the incident now cast nervous glances, afraid of unseen listeners. Even a base hospital nurse who had overheard corridor discussions was quietly relocated. Major Marcel felt the growing isolation intensely. Official requests for investigation updates were systematically ignored. Any follow-up inquiries were deflected with polite but firm refusals. The narrative was being methodically rewritten, not through public statements, but through the gradual erosion of memory and evidence. Names were redacted from documents. Locations were altered or erased. Conversations were subtly rephrased. What had once been a vivid, extraordinary story was being transformed into an unrecognizable whisper, its truth slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The world might never fully know what had transpired in that lonely stretch of New Mexico desert, but for those who had been there, who had touched the impossible, the silence itself spoke volumes. Marcel sat alone outside his quarters one evening, watching the sun dip behind distant messes. The sky deepened from orange to indigo, stars emerging like distant lanterns in the vast dark. He thought not of what had been discovered, but of what had vanished. The pieces he had once held, the symbols etched into metal that no one else could explain. The story's no longer told. The desert breeze stirred dry grass at his feet, carrying the softest hint of memory. A faint, lingering breath of something lost, something hidden. Marcel closed his eyes and let the quiet settle around him. The story remained hidden, silent, waiting beneath the stars. Far from the bright desert sun and dusty plains of New Mexico, a small group of men gathered in a quiet, windowless room under the weight of unspoken truths. Late into the night, behind locked doors and guarded corridors, the air was thick with careful stillness, as if the walls themselves had learned to hold their breath. Around a heavy wooden table lay photographs, documents, and carefully wrapped samples, remnants of something no one fully understood. Yet everyone felt its gravity. Men in crisp uniforms and tailored suits leaned forward, eyes scanning each detail with a mix of curiosity and concern. A senior officer cleared his throat and began the briefing, his voice low but firm. "What we have recovered," he said, "is unlike anything in our known arsenals or research. The material light, strong, resistant to heat, defies conventional explanation. The symbols etched onto some fragments do not match any known language or code. The truth seemed to blur until it slipped through the fingers of time itself. It was as if the event was being erased, not with force or fanfare, but with a quiet, deliberate patience. Like dust carried on the desert wind, the evidence scattered and faded, leaving behind only a whisper, a trace barely felt but never fully gone." The room fell into silence as eyes met around the table. An officer broke the calm, presenting their evidence. Photographs, physical samples, and multiple eyewitness accounts. The implications were profound. A man in the room questioned the possibility of a foreign experiment, perhaps Soviet technology. The response was swift and certain. No radar had detected any aircraft in the area, and the witnesses described a craft with speeds and maneuverability beyond earthly capabilities. The debate unfolded carefully. Some argued that disclosure would risk public panic. Their society might not be prepared for such a revelation. Strategic concerns loomed large. Considerations of technology, diplomacy, and national security weighed heavily. A younger officer warned that revealing the information could trigger an unprecedented arms race. They risked losing control of the narrative. Yet another voice countered that secrecy breeds suspicion. History had shown the dangers of hidden truths. These were not just bureaucrats discussing a report. They were custodians of a secret that could fundamentally reshape the world. Each understood the immense burden of their responsibility. After long, measured deliberation, a consensus emerged. The findings would remain strictly confidential. Physical evidence would be secured and removed from public view. Witnesses would be instructed to maintain silence. The press would be carefully managed to prevent speculation. If the incident was mentioned at all, it would be reframed as a simple misidentification, a weather balloon easily explained. A senior official concluded that their priority must be maintaining stability both domestically and internationally. They could not risk causing fear or chaos. Quietly, orders were drafted. A careful chain of command would enforce this new narrative. The delicate balance of secrecy and control was set in motion. One by one, the men gathered their papers and rose. Their footsteps echoed softly against the cold floor as they left. Outside, the world continued, blissfully unaware of the silent pact made in this room. The door closed with a gentle click, sealing the secret away. And in the quiet that followed, a story remained untold. The desert around Roswell settled into its timeless rhythm as years passed, the sun rising and falling in endless shades of amber and gold. Wind whispered through sagebrush and mosquite, carrying memories, both faint and vivid, of a strange object that had fallen from the sky. What began as breaking news soon drifted into folklore. Headlines changed, daily life continued, but the story remained alive, passed quietly between generations like a delicate, whispered secret. Families spoke in hushed tones. Neighbors remembered the unusual excitement of that summer, Witnesses carried their memories like precious, fragile things too complex to fully explain, too strange to forget. As decades unfolded, Roswell transformed into a symbol, a touchstone for the curious and skeptical. Books filled shelves. Documentaries flickered across television screens. Films reimagined the incident in vibrant colors and dramatic scenes. Each retelling added layers of interpretation and mystery, weaving fact and fiction into a captivating tapestry that drew millions. Some stories grew wild, stretching beyond truth to entertain and astonish. Others sought to dismiss and explain the strange events, anchoring them firmly in the known world. Yet the fundamental question endured: what really happened in those quiet New Mexico fields? For those who lived through it, men like Jesse Marcel, the rancher M. Brazel, the officers who handled the wreckage, the legacy was deeply personal. They bore the weight of a secret few could understand, a knowledge that quietly and profoundly shaped their lives. Marcel's son remembered his father's stories, softly and carefully told, never fully revealing the whole truth. Brazil carried his memories with a mixture of wonder and regret, knowing some questions might never find answers. And so the mystery lived on, not as a tale of fear or frenzy, but as a gentle invitation to wonder. The universe whispers stories in the quiet moments before sleep, where the mind wanders between waking and dreaming. A soft murmur emerges in the darkness, carried by a desert breeze. We are reminded that so much remains unknown. The vastness of existence stretches beyond our understanding, revealing that beauty often resides not in definitive answers, but in the questions themselves. As darkness envelops you, let stillness wrap around you like a gentle blanket. Stars guide you toward rest, and if a faint sound catches your attention, a metallic shimmer or a silent symbol traced in the night, know that a story waits patiently, peaceful and ever-present. Ordinary people have witnessed extraordinary events that never reached headlines. Strange encounters and quiet sightings linger in the memories of those who experienced them. This is a collection of eerie UFO stories from around the world, tales that drift at the edges of our understanding. Take The Nameless Farm, a story from a cold November evening in 1974. Nestled in the wooded hills of rural Pennsylvania, a small family farm settled into the night. Harold, the father, had just secured the barn. Inside, his wife and 2 children finished dinner as a low fire crackled. The wind whispered through bare branches. As Harold walked back to the house, something felt different. The air had an unusual stillness. No crickets, no movement. A deep resonant hum vibrated through his chest, unlike any sound he'd heard before. He searched the cloudless sky, expecting a helicopter or plane, but saw only a thin crescent moon. Then the lights appeared. First one, then 2, then a complete ring hovering above the old wooden barn. They glowed softly, white with a bluish tinge, pulsing around the edges of something just beyond recognition. The craft remained completely silent, suspended barely 30 feet above the barn roof. A pale light beam stretched downward, moving slowly like a rhythmic searchlight. Harold stood frozen, witnessing something beyond explanation. The night started like any other, but something was different. Harold was frozen in place, unable to move or call out, his breath hanging in the cold air. Some invisible force seemed to pin him to the ground, time stretching like molasses. His wife had noticed the strange lights from the living room window. Grabbing a flashlight, she rushed outside, but the moment she stepped onto the porch, everything went dark. Power vanished. Heat disappeared. The air carried a metallic electric smell. Above the barn, a glowing object cast an eerie light. Its beam swept across the ground, lingering momentarily over the cow pen before vanishing without a sound. Moments later, electricity returned as if nothing had happened. Morning revealed the true strangeness. The cows were gone. Completely. No broken fences, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just empty pens and mysterious blackened circles, scorching the grass. Near the barn, the ground bore evidence of intense heat. The metal water trough warped beyond recognition, while the barn itself remained untouched. Local police filed a report, but they had nothing concrete. No tracks, no suspects. Just a traumatized family with an unbelievable story. The farm dog avoided the barn for weeks. The scorched grass never regrew. Harold was a changed man, quiet, withdrawn. By spring, he sold the farm and moved his family into town, leaving behind the place he once called home. When anyone asked about that night, Harold would simply shake his head. "Some things ain't meant for us to understand," he'd say. Locals whispered. Kids told ghost stories about the barn in the woods, but those who knew Harold understood he wasn't one to fabricate tales. His wife, practical and reserved, refused to discuss the incident entirely. The new landowners claim nothing unusual has happened. Yet on cold nights, if you walk past the old barn, a faint hum might still echo in the distance, a subtle reminder of that inexplicable November night when something otherworldly visited the farm. The winter forest lay silent under a thick blanket of snow, its paths barely visible through the dark pines. Carvey, a postal worker in his late 30s, knew these woods well. Cold air bit at his lungs with each breath, but he continued his regular walk, boots crunching softly against the frozen ground. His routine trek through the pine woods near Roven was something he cherished, a moment of solitude where twisted tree branches stood like sentinels around him. No wind stirred that night, only the occasional groan of branches heavy with snow. Without warning, something ahead caught his eye. What initially looked like a tree trunk was different. Too smooth, too deliberately positioned. As he drew closer, the figure became clear. Roughly 7 feet tall, with an unnaturally pale skin that seemed to glow against the dark forest backdrop. Its frame was narrow, limbs thin, head slightly tilted. But the eyes, large, completely black, with a faint red inner glow, held him motionless. Carvey felt no immediate fear, just a strange, dreamlike confusion. His breathing slowed. Time seemed to stretch. The figure made no threatening move. It simply watched, then slowly raised its left arm and pointed into the surrounding woods. When Carvey turned to look, only darkness greeted him. Returning his gaze, he found the figure had vanished. No sound, no trace, just a subtle warmth hanging in the air. For weeks afterward, vivid dreams haunted him. He'd wake drenched in sweat, remembering fragments that felt alien. Metallic hallways, sourceless pulsing lights, a low hum resonating in his bones. Nosebleeds, headaches, and static electricity became his new companions. Years passed before he shared his experience. Online, he discovered similar accounts. Stories of watchers with glowing red eyes appearing in isolated places, silently observing. He wasn't alone. In the quiet village of Charminster, Dorset, summer evenings stretched long and warm, with pink skies hanging overhead and the air thick with hay and sea salt. But that summer was different. Something strange began to unfold in the old churchyard. It started with a farmer returning home after dusk. Passing the church's stone wall as the sun dipped below the hills, he glimpsed a soft blue light hovering above a gravestone. It shimmered like moonlight on water before vanishing just as quickly. He kept silent. A few nights later, 2 schoolboys sneaking out with torches witnessed the phenomenon. Several pale blue lights drifted among the gravestones, moving with an unnatural deliberateness. These weren't insects or tricks of light. As the boys approached, the lights didn't flee. They simply waited. One boy later claimed he heard a whisper, a voice not quite human speaking words he couldn't comprehend. His companion fainted on the spot. When he regained consciousness, he remembered nothing specific, only a profound sense of being watched and judged. More sightings followed rapidly. The local vicar spotted the lights through his office window and never spoke of them again. A retired nurse walking her dog swore she saw a light pass directly through a stone cross. Her dog barked frantically, then whimpered for days afterward. Always blue, always silent, always hovering, the lights appeared only at night. An amateur investigator was about to delve deeper into the mystery. Meanwhile, years earlier and miles away, KV had his own unexplained encounter. A year after a strange sighting, he moved to the city, never walking that trail again. Despite telling himself it was a trick of cold, fatigue, or light, he never forgot the pale figure, the eyes, the gesture toward the trees. He sometimes wonders what might have happened if he'd followed where it pointed, what lay just beyond his line of sight. Yet some part of him is glad he didn't discover the truth, because whatever it was had been waiting, watching. Here's the rewritten text. August had a night that would become legend in the small village. A photographer set up his camera in the old churchyard, determined to document the strange phenomenon everyone had been whispering about. Hours passed with nothing happening. The night was still. Just before midnight, everything changed. His camera suddenly powered off, completely drained. An oppressive silence fell. Then the lights appeared. He described at least 5 orbs, each about the size of a grapefruit, moving with an almost purposeful intelligence. They circled the central gravestone, pulsing softly as if engaged in some silent communication. One by one, they rose straight up into the sky and vanished without a sound or trace. After that night, the lights never returned. The churchyard settled back into its quiet existence, mossy gravestones standing undisturbed. Villagers gradually stopped talking about the incident as if by some unspoken agreement, allowing the August events to fade into memory. Yet on late summer nights, when mist clings low to the ground, Some claim you might sense something watching. A faint hum lingers just beyond hearing. Something ancient, something that once called the dead to glow. Story 4 unfolded on a cloudless spring night in eastern Montana. The sky stretched wide and black, studded with stars. Dave, a long-haul trucker, was transporting industrial pipe across the plains, deliberately avoiding the busy interstate. Midnight approached. No towns broke the landscape, only endless rolling grasslands and the steady hum of truck wheels. Dave knew this route well, but something felt different this time. His headlights revealed only empty road ahead, the terrain sliding into dark nothingness. Suddenly, the radio went silent. No static, no gradual fade, just absolute quiet. Dave tapped the radio, checked the antenna, then he noticed something odd. His dashboard lights flickered, the speedometer wavered, and the truck's engine coughed before continuing as if nothing had happened. He slowed the rig, scanning the sky. That's when he saw them. The night was heavy with an impossible stillness. Dave was driving his truck when 3 massive black triangles appeared, gliding low above the road. Each craft was flat and smooth, with soft white lights marking its corners. They moved in a perfect slow formation, completely silent. No sound of engines, no wind disturbance, just an overwhelming presence hanging above the highway. Dave pulled over and stepped out of his cab. The air felt strange, thick and electric, like an impending thunderstorm that never broke. The 3 craft hovered steadily overhead, maybe a few hundred feet up, moving forward with an eerie grace. No markings, no flashing lights, just pure geometric precision. Dave stood motionless, watching. Minutes passed, or maybe more. A strange pressure settled in his chest, not pain, just an inexplicable weight. Then everything shifted. He blinked, and suddenly he was driving again. Road signs had changed. The sky looked slightly different, as if an hour had vanished. His dash lights were back to normal, and his coffee sat cold in the cup holder. The radio remained silent. Checking his GPS, Dave realized he was 31 miles further along than he remembered. He had no recollection of the intervening miles. His always running dash cam had captured something odd. At the exact moment of the triangle sighting, the footage scrambled into static before resuming miles down the highway. A week later, an anonymous email arrived with no message, just a file. Inside was an edited version of his dashcam footage, showing the 3 triangles floating perfectly framed in darkness. Dave deleted it the next day, wanting no further explanation. On long, quiet drives, he sometimes looks up at the stars and wonders how many others have witnessed these strange craft. Shadows moving silently, time slipping unnoticed, and always that heavy silence trailing behind. Some mysteries, he knows, are better left unexplored. A team of geologists trekked deep into the Siberian wilderness, heading toward a mysterious zone where technology failed and compasses went haywire. They were seasoned professionals accustomed to harsh environments and isolation. 20 kilometers into their journey, the landscape transformed dramatically. The familiar Siberian pines gave way to pale, almost colorless trees with bark smooth as marble. An eerie silence descended. No birds, no ambient sounds. The snow beneath their feet grew brittle, taking on a faint greenish hue. Then the glass appeared. Scattered across the forest floor were rippling, translucent shards, some clear, others stained with rainbow colors. The surrounding trees were bizarrely warped, bent away from a central point, as if an explosion had occurred without heat or flame. At the heart of this strange phenomenon lay a perfect 60-foot wide circle. Unlike the surrounding terrain, this area was devoid of snow, ice, or debris. Instead, scorched soil had been fused into a smooth black glass surface. No footprints, no signs of life, nothing disturbed the area. Their equipment began failing immediately. Batteries drained within seconds. Cameras malfunctioned. Metal warped inexplicably. One compass spun so violently it shattered its own casing. Vadim, unable to resist curiosity, stepped into the circle before his teammates could stop him. The air inside seemed to shimmer subtly. His voice didn't echo when he called out, and his silhouette appeared slightly distorted, like an out-of-sync film. He smiled, walked further in, and then vanished without a sound or flash. When the remaining team members approached the circle's edge, most were overwhelmed by sudden nausea and dizziness. One collapsed and vomited, another began bleeding from his nose. They desperately dragged each other from the forest. 2 days later, a rescue team arrived to find nothing. The scorched glass circle had disappeared, replaced by fresh snow and undisturbed trees. No trace remained of their campsite or the bizarre phenomenon. Vadim was never found. The official report attributed his disappearance to terrain conditions, but the team never returned to fieldwork. Within a year, several members developed rare cancers. Years later, satellite images would reveal strange winter heat signatures, perfect, shifting circles of warmth with no identifiable source, moving unpredictably across the landscape. In the quiet whispers of Russian folklore, rumors persist about this inexplicable forest and its mysterious vanishing circle. Lake St. John stretches across Quebec's northern landscape, a wide expanse of water surrounded by dense pine forests and lonely roads. The kind of place that swallows silence and secrets whole. In the summer of 2003, 4 young students sought refuge from city life, pitching their tents along the lake's southern edge on a night that would become unforgettable. Their evening started normally enough. A crackling campfire, sausages sizzling, laughter echoing into the darkness. But after midnight, everything changed. The lake went impossibly still. No wind, no ripple. The fire hissed as the breeze vanished completely. Then it appeared. An immense oval object hung about 100 feet above the water's surface. Not buzzing, not flashing, just existing. Its metallic surface was seamless, smooth as river stone polished by centuries. Light circled its center, glowing in colors that defied description, somewhere between violet and green, shifting without pattern. The campers stood frozen, transfixed. No one reached for a phone. No one moved. Marianne was the first to point. Directly beneath the craft, something impossible stood on the lake's surface. A figure. Tall, impossibly tall, slender, with limbs hanging low, pale skin with a bluish tint. No face, no discernible features. Something not quite human, yet strangely familiar. A loud pop from the campfire broke the spell. When they looked back, both the craft and the figure had vanished. The silence remained. The water lay motionless. One camper realized he'd been holding his breath, his chest aching from the tension. They didn't sleep that night. At dawn, they packed quickly, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Something had happened, something they couldn't explain. The lake remembered. And some stories are better left unspoken. The Scottish Highlands spread out in a vast landscape of wind and silence. Endless moors stretch beyond sight, occasionally interrupted by stone walls, grazing sheep, or a distant glimmer. In the spring of 1958, an old shepherd named UN McNeil lived a solitary life near Glen Lyon, one of the region's most isolated valleys. His stone cottage and border collie Bramble were his only companions. Like many Highlanders of that era, Uwan was a man deeply rooted in routine and local superstitions, spending his days among the hills and his nights by the fire. Just after sunset one evening, something unusual caught Yuan's attention. A section of sky above the distant hill glowed an unnatural deep amber, remaining constant even as the surrounding horizon darkened. The light hovered motionless, then began moving with deliberate, slow precision. As it drew closer, Ewan observed a tall, vertical structure floating silently just above the ground, following the hill's contours. This pillar of light cast no shadow and emitted no heat, only an eerie, pulsing presence. Bramble's low growl and bristling fur signaled something was wrong. The sheep started moving strangely, walking in a tight, unnatural circle as if gently pulled by an invisible current. Ewan's attempts to call out seemed to vanish into the air with no echo or wind disturbing the silent scene. Near the light pillar, he spotted 3 or 4 figures. Tall and slender, they stood completely still. Their bodies defied human description, smooth, thin, with elongated heads and faces that were reflective surfaces, like living mirrors with no visible eyes. Ewan found himself frozen, later describing the experience as being trapped inside a deep dream. He understood he was witnessing something beyond his known world, yet felt an inexplicable sense of calm, not welcomed, but not threatened. Stories like these would later surface in obscure online forums, with similar accounts of silent crafts over Quebec's remote lakes and mysterious figures watching from water surfaces. Some, like Marianne, would never venture camping again after such encounters. The Sinai Peninsula stretches out, a landscape of ancient silence where sand meets jagged mountains and deep starlit skies. In 1982, during a lull in regional conflict, a team of Egyptian communication specialists was stationed at a remote outpost near the Jabal Musa range, far from civilization and surrounded only by desert wind. Their nightly routine typically involved monitoring radio transmissions, static, coded chatter, and the low hum of long-distance frequencies. But this night would be different. At exactly 2:13 a.m., every channel went completely silent. Not a hint of static or interference, just an oppressive, heavy quiet. Then Adele noticed something unusual. An unmarked frequency appeared, narrow and clean. As he carefully adjusted the dials, he heard a sound unlike anything before, a low pulse like a heartbeat through metal, followed by a voice in an unrecognizable language. It was rhythmic, tonal, layered with an almost melodic hum. The monitoring hut grew cold. Lights flickered. Outside, a long, dark spindle slowly rotated between mountain peaks, hovering just above ground, yet not high in the sky. Its surface was matte and seamless, without windows or lights, just a pure shape. One team member walked outside, muttering in a language none of them understood. His eyes were unfocused, his movements uncertain. When colleagues brought him back inside, he collapsed and slept for 12 hours straight. The strange signal continued precisely 33 minutes before stopping abruptly. Something else shifted too. The stars above the outpost seemed to have moved slightly, as if space itself had been stretched and then released. One technician discovered all his watches were now off by exactly 7 seconds. The next day, their commanding officer ordered all recordings destroyed, but Adele kept a copy, preserving the night's extraordinary events. Walter Hensley, a former Navy meteorologist who preferred solitude, was stationed at an isolated weather station just outside Machiasport, Maine, in the fall of 1969. His assignment was straightforward: monitor barometric changes and transmit twice daily reports to a research center inland. One night, everything changed. A strange fog arrived without warning, unnaturally fast. The moon's silver line across the ocean disappeared in an instant. Visibility dropped to 0. Radios crackled, static hummed through the walls, and then the lights failed. Fumbling for backup power, Walter switched on the generator. But the station's sensors refused to cooperate. Dials spun wildly. Displays blinked random symbols. Through the thick observation window, he saw something hovering just above the sea. A smooth metallic sphere glowing with a faint bluish hue that seemed to sink into the water rather than reflect off it. The sphere remained perfectly still, silent, watching. Walter meticulously logged every detail by hand. When he tried to use the radio, he heard only a low modulated tone, not static, not a buzz, but a distinct pulse. Then, emerging from the fog, a shape appeared. Human-like, but impossibly tall. Its silhouette shimmered slightly like heat above a flame, moving steadily toward the station through fog that never parted. Walter backed away from the glass as the figure paused just 10 feet from the door. Suddenly, everything stopped. The fog evaporated in seconds. The light vanished, sensors rebooted, and the station returned to its eerie silence, as if nothing had happened. Years later, Walter shared a signal recording with a French researcher specializing in rare languages. The researcher reportedly went pale midway through listening. He claimed the tones matched no human dialect, but carried precise mathematical intervals, like a signal designed to teach or test. Walter never played the tape again. The researcher left the next day, his study unfinished. Walter was never the same after what happened. The next morning, he left his post and never came back. His logs were found complete, except the final page was strange. It was filled with dozens of hand-drawn circles, each shaded differently, each bearing the same cryptic note: not fog, not sea, not alone. Local fishermen still talk about how fog can roll in that quickly. When it does, the gulls fall silent. In December 1997, Flight 815 was a commercial red-eye traveling from Tokyo to Los Angeles, halfway across the Pacific. Most passengers slept as the cabin lights dimmed. Outside, only clouds and black ocean stretched endlessly. Near the rear of the aircraft, Daniel Pierce sat in seat 33A by the window. A business traveler returning home? He couldn't sleep. While reading a worn paperback, something caught his eye outside. A light. But not a star. Much closer. It moved perfectly alongside the plane, a glowing orange sphere like heated metal. It pulsed gently, almost breathing. Daniel realized it wasn't alone. 3 more appeared, forming a triangular formation just below the wing. Strangely, no turbulence, no sound, no alarm disturbed the cabin. Everything remained eerily quiet. Then came a deep, low hum that seemed to resonate from within his own chest. Looking around, no one else moved. Time felt suspended. The lights outside began shifting, bleeding into soft reds and violets beyond description. Between these lights, Daniel glimpsed a figure, tall, unmoving, expressionless, pale, smooth skin, eyes that reflected nothing. It didn't speak, yet a single word entered Daniel's mind, clear as a whisper: observe. He blinked. Everything returned to normal. Cabin lights, snoring passengers. Flight attendants moving through the aisle. The lights were gone. Daniel's book was closed, a bookmark tucked into a page he hadn't yet read. Upon landing, he told no one. But later, while reviewing his notes, something felt different. By 1989, the Velasco family farmhouse stood at the edge of an empty field in the quiet hills of Córdoba province, Argentina. A retired schoolteacher in her 70s, Rosa was the last of the Lascos. She lived simply with her few chickens, a garden, and her black dog Mateo, finding comfort in her solitude. One early spring night, everything changed. A sound like radio static stirred her from sleep. Mateo growled at the foot of the bed, his unease palpable. She pulled back the curtain to see strange lights hovering above the field. Not lanterns or headlights, but orbs moving with an unnatural, fluid precision. Quietly, she opened the back door. The garden glowed with an eerie bluish light, casting long, distorted shadows. The air felt heavy, charged with an electric anticipation. Two figures emerged, tall, thin, with pale gray-blue skin like polished stone. They stood motionless beyond her vegetables. Rosa froze. Mateo didn't bark, only whimpering softly in fear. Though the figures remained silent, she felt something penetrate her mind. A thought, a memory that wasn't hers, a street she'd never seen, a voice unfamiliar. Suddenly, the windmill stopped turning. The orbs winked out one by one. The figures moved in perfect synchronization, disappearing into the tall grass. The light faded and the air returned to normal. The next morning, everything appeared unchanged, except for one remarkable detail. A vine had grown over a meter overnight, its tomato inexplicably warm and ripe beyond reason. Rosa kept her experience to herself. Years later, neighbors would speak of strange lights near the property. Some reported hearing static by the windmill long after Rosa had passed away. Her encounter remained a silent mystery, known only to her and Matteo on that moonlit night in 1989. Dr. Simo Olari, a physicist from Helsinki, sought solitude in the winter of 1974. His destination, a remote cabin near Lake Inari deep in Lapland's snow-covered wilderness. With no electricity, just a fireplace, kerosene lamp, and radio, he wasn't there to rest. Notebooks in hand, he hoped isolation would sharpen his focus. Daily hikes along the frozen lake's edge gave way to nights of intense work by firelight. On the sixth evening, something unusual began. A strange hum, not from the radio, vibrated through the floor and walls low, steady, almost musical. Stepping outside, Ari expected to see a snowmobile but found only silence. Then he saw it, a pale disk of light hovering high above the frozen lake. Motionless, soft, cold. Its glow didn't cast shadows but shimmered on the snow like moonlight beneath water. The hum stopped. No wind, no sound. The cold seemed suspended, distant. Ari's mechanical watch, which he wound each night, had frozen. The disk tilted slightly, pulsing with a single white flash. He blinked. Morning had arrived. The fire was out. His tea kettle cold. 2 days had vanished. His calendar showed time had passed, but he remembered nothing. His boots were wet, as if he'd been walking through snow. An unfamiliar journal page lay open, filled with curved symbols in neat rows. A small circle divided by a wave at the bottom. Ari left that same day. He never publicly discussed the incident, but colleagues noticed a change. His work in theoretical physics was abandoned. Instead, he turned to sound and resonance, developing a theory he called harmonic displacement. No one understood it. When he died in 1993, the cabin was sold. The journal remained, the strange page intact. Years later, a local skier reported seeing a dull ring of light above the lake. He claimed no sound accompanied it, yet when he checked his watch, 5 minutes had mysteriously disappeared. The house was later found with its door wide open. No signs of damage or theft, just one overripe tomato sitting on the kitchen table, still warm. The Western Highlands of Scotland hide Lomorar, one of Europe's deepest freshwater lakes. Fog shrouds the steep hills that plunge into its glassy surface, creating an atmosphere of mystery and isolation. For centuries, legends of Morag have haunted the lake's depths, but in 2001, something truly extraordinary might have stirred beneath the water's surface. Duncan Fraser, a forestry worker from Fort William, was working a week-long contract repairing fencing along the lake's eastern bank. The area was remote with dense woods and limited access. He carried a small tent, gas stove, and a camera used for wildlife and landscape photography. On a second night by the lake, a crescent moon hung overhead. Sitting by his campfire and sipping tea, Duncan noticed a pale glow moving beneath the water's surface. Initially thinking it was moonlight, he realized it was moving against the current. The glow split into 2 dim round lights that began rotating around each other like twin stars. Intrigued, Duncan stood and walked closer with his camera. The lights descended deeper, then rose again, casting a faint shimmer on the rocks near his feet. No sound disturbed the lake's perfect stillness. A third light suddenly appeared, brighter and more concentrated, shooting upward like a beam. Duncan felt a strange pressure in the air, as if the atmosphere had thickened. He wasn't afraid, but overwhelmed by a deep instinct to remain motionless. The lights rose faster beneath the water, then blinked out simultaneously, leaving the lake in complete darkness. The next morning, Duncan found no evidence of disturbance. However, every photo taken that night was completely blank, pure white frames as if exposed to direct light. Strangely, images before and after remained unaffected. 2 days later, Duncan reported the incident to a local ranger, describing only the lights, movement, and an undefinable sense of abnormality. The ranger listened silently, then cryptically remarked, "People forget how deep this lake really goes." In the years that followed, people began sharing unusual accounts from the eastern bank. Small lights glimmered beneath the water's surface. Divers encountered fish that seemed stunned yet unharmed. One particularly experienced military-trained free diver reported hearing a low-frequency hum at 200 feet, reminiscent of an engine buried deep in rock. While no structures have ever been discovered at the bottom of La Mora, the mysterious lights continue to return on certain nights, spinning silently, waiting just under the surface where nothing should be visible. Story 14, The Transmission Tower, Montana, 1962. Outside Great Falls, Montana, a solitary government communications site perched on a snowy ridge. Tower 7 consisted of a steel radio tower and a low cinder block building staffed by two-person shifts with a straightforward mission, relaying microwave signals between military installations. Most nights passed without incident. That winter, James Delaney, a quiet electronics specialist, worked the midnight shift alone after his partner's unexpected reassignment. On his third solo night, something extraordinary occurred. Around 2:15 a.m., a precise, steady tone began seeping through the building's receiver. It wasn't interference or static. James checked the readouts and found nothing unusual. The tone didn't correspond to any active channels, and when he attempted to isolate it, the entire console dimmed. The tower lights flickered. Stepping outside into the freezing wind, James noticed the air was perfectly still. No storm, no clouds. Hovering approximately 30 feet above the tower's tip was a dull, matte black object. Disc-shaped and featureless, it remained completely silent. James stood motionless as the object hovered for nearly 2 minutes. Suddenly, a red light beam extended from its underside, not touching the ground, but connecting directly to the tower's top. The tone returned, now louder and emanating from the object itself. It vibrated through the metal, the soil, and James's chest. As quickly as it appeared, the light snapped off. The disc tilted slowly, turned soundlessly, and vanished into the night sky in a smooth horizontal blur. No arc, no trail, just gone. Inside, James found the equipment dead. Backup systems refused to engage, and when technicians arrived the next day, they discovered every recording had been completely erased. In a small village outside Samarkand, Uzbekistan, a quiet place of farms and wide skies where children played freely and elders watched time drift by. An extraordinary event unfolded in the spring of 1995. Amina was a 10-year-old girl, shy and often seen wandering the meadows behind her family's home. She carried a notebook and pencil, usually drawing birds and clouds. One warm late April afternoon, she walked toward the field's edge and didn't return. Her older brother burst into the house that evening, pale and breathless. He'd witnessed something impossible. Amina floating upright, arms at her sides, suspended 10 feet above the ground, completely motionless. Initially, her parents dismissed it as a child's wild imagination or trick. But when they and several neighbors rushed to the field, they saw exactly what the brother described. Directly above Amina hovered a perfect silver sphere, smooth, metallic, unmarked. It hung silently, as if connected to her by an invisible thread. Witnesses later spoke of an unnatural silence, as if sound itself had been pulled away. Amina remained calm, her eyes open and focused on something no one else could perceive. Suddenly, the sphere pulsed once and began to rise. She followed. Her ascent was slow, her gaze fixed upward. At 20 feet, her body seemed to shimmer. Then, just as gently, she was lowered back to earth. The moment her feet touched the ground, the sphere vanished, leaving behind only empty sky, no trail, no flash. By the next morning, Tower 7 was quietly shut down. The structure remains rusting in the wind with severed cables. Locals avoid the ridge, claiming the air feels strange. Some still report seeing a faint red line stretching impossibly high across the cold sky. Amina blinked and looked around, confused by the stares. She had no memory of what happened. No sounds, no floating sensation, no silver light lingered in her mind. The locals still talk about that afternoon. Some call it a miracle, others something more mysterious. But everyone agrees. Something eerily silent descended from above. Despite medical examinations revealing nothing unusual, Amina lived a long, quiet life without any visible trauma. Yet she often spoke of her dreams, perfect glowing spheres, and a profound sense of peace when walking near field edges under vast, empty skies. On a quiet stretch of Route 13 in rural Virginia, 2 highway workers encountered something extraordinary just after midnight in the fall of 1980. A tall, frameless mirror stood perfectly vertical on the roadside, defying explanation. When Michael and Leon approached, they noticed immediate oddities. The mirror reflected only darkness, not their headlights. Michael saw no reflection of himself, just an endless altered road curving sharply into a non-existent pine grove. Within the mirror's surface, fog rolled across a false highway. Tall, thin shapes moved slowly without faces or lights, just shadows that occasionally paused as if listening. Leon touched the mirror's surface. It felt neither cold nor warm, but completely neutral. A brief, sharp tone rang out like metal scraping metal. The shadowy figures turned simultaneously, seemingly aware of the watchers. Michael stepped back, but Leon remained transfixed. Suddenly, Michael glimpsed Leon's reflection deep within the mirrored road, walking into the strange pine grove. He grabbed Leon's arm and pulled him away. The mirror vanished instantly, not shattering, not moving, simply disappearing without sound or flash. The road returned to empty darkness. Leon collapsed and remembered nothing upon waking. But from that night forward, he never again ventured near Route 13. Michael returned alone the following week. Where the mirror once stood, there was nothing, but he swore a new curve had formed in the woods, where no road had ever existed before. Locals still speak of this phantom turn. They claim that if you drive that stretch after midnight, your headlights might catch a glimpse of a tall glass shape just off the shoulder, but only for a second. Look too long and the road might seem to lead somewhere it absolutely shouldn't. In 2010, deep in the remote highlands of central Tasmania, far from towns and coastal roads, a patch of wilderness waited, known for its steep ridges and thick eucalyptus forests. Few hikers ever ventured here. The terrain was unforgiving, and trails, when visible at all, would quickly vanish into dense undergrowth. 2 researchers, Emily and Theo, were conducting a biodiversity survey in this isolated area. They had been camping for 2 nights, carefully cataloging bird calls and plant species for a conservation project. On their 3rd evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, an unexplained silence descended across the valley. The forest sounds simply stopped. No insects, no birds, no breeze rustling through trees. The air became dense and still, and then, high above them on the ridgeline, 3 figures stood motionless. Initially, they appeared to be hikers, but these figures were different, unnaturally tall and completely stationary. Arms hung rigidly at their sides, they faced directly down toward the campsite. Theo called out. No response came. Using binoculars, they studied the strange silhouettes. That's when Emily whispered the chilling observation. They don't have faces. In the fading light, they saw smooth, featureless heads. No eyes, no mouths, just pale, bare skin. The figures remained unchanged, watching for hours. Emily and Theo took turns maintaining vigilance. By midnight, nothing had shifted. The compressed air felt wrong. Theo's satellite phone refused to power on. Around 2 a.m., the fire began to dim, not from lack of fuel, but as if the light itself was being absorbed. Then, the sound arrived, not from the forest, but from inside their heads. A low, internal hum vibrated, building pressure behind their eyes. The figures began to move, not walking, but sliding effortlessly down the ridge in a perfectly straight line. Theo grabbed a flare and fired it into the darkness. The Kenpil family farm in rural Ukraine had stood for generations, a quiet place untouched by politics or cities. Wheat, sunflowers, and barley swayed under long golden sunsets, marking the rhythm of their simple life. But in the autumn of 1987, something changed. One morning, Pavel Kuleno, the eldest son, noticed an unnatural stillness. No birds chirped, no dogs barked in the distance. The wheat stalks remained motionless, stripped of their usual rustling. The farm was wrapped in a thick, oppressive silence. In the barn, Mickey Kuleno was sharpening tools when the world transformed. A pulsing blue glow, like moonlight trapped in water, poured across the fields from above. It had no source, no craft, no beam, just a pure, overwhelming presence. The barn rafters glowed, and the horses stood frozen in a trance. Mikhail walked outside and stopped. Floating 15 feet above the wheat was an oval-shaped object, dark at its center, surrounded by slow-turning rings of pale light that shimmered like glass. It didn't move. It didn't hum. It simply existed in complete silence. Time itself seemed to stretch. Pavel, standing on the porch, watched his father's movements slow as if moving through syrup. A drop of sweat hung suspended halfway down his cheek. The wind halted. Dust hung in the air like frozen snow. Inside the house, clocks stopped ticking. Then came a sound, not from the sky, but from the ground. A low, deep resonance trembled through the earth, like the groan of something vast awakening beneath the soil. The wheat bent outward, pushed by invisible hands away from the object hovering above. As suddenly as it began, it ended. The object vanished. The glow disappeared. Birds returned to the sky. Clocks in the house ticked forward again as if nothing had happened. Neither Pavel nor his family ever spoke much about that day. The farm continued, but something had changed, a memory of a moment when reality itself seemed to pause and breathe. Exactly 3 minutes lost. Mikhail's world changed forever in those moments. For the next 2 decades, he lived in perfect health, but never spoke another word. There was no fear in his silence, just a profound peace, as if he had heard something so immense, so final, that words became meaningless. In the winter of 1953, Raymond Cross, a bush pilot who had been flying supplies to remote Alaskan villages for years, encountered something inexplicable. His routine supply drop to Akatuk, a small fishing village with fewer than 50 residents, turned into a chilling mystery. The Inwood community was known for its isolation, tucked away on the western Alaskan coast. Raymond knew every detail of this place, the faces of its people, the dogs, the way smoke typically drifted from chimneys. But this day was different. Circling the snow-packed inlet, he noticed an unsettling stillness. No smoke rose. No movement stirred. As his plane landed, the silence became oppressive. The houses stood intact, boats lined the shore, yet no one emerged, not even a dog. Walking the main path, Raymond called out. Silence answered. Open doors. A cold stew on an abandoned fire pit. Clothing hung frozen mid-wind. No footprints marred the fresh snow. No signs of struggle. Just an absolute, inexplicable absence. The radio crackled with strange feedback, not static, but rhythmic pulses resembling sonar or breathing. Inside the schoolhouse, an even more bizarre scene awaited. Chairs had been meticulously arranged in a perfect spiral. A chalkboard displayed an unknown circle filled with cryptic lines and dots. The chalk, broken mid-stroke, lay on the floor. Less than an hour later, Raymond flew to Nome, filed a report, and returned days afterward with state authorities. By then, snow had blanketed the village. No bodies were discovered. No evacuation tracks. Just a town suspended in time. The government dismissed it as a migration event or ice instability. But Raymond knew something deeper had occurred. He had felt the quiet. Today, the Kenko farm grows sunflowers taller than anywhere in the region. Locals whisper that the soil remembers those 3 missing minutes, even if no one speaks of what truly happened. In the harsh Arctic landscape of Novoslia, far north of the Russian mainland, the Soviet Navy maintained a covert listening station in 1971. The island was notorious for nuclear testing, extreme cold, and prolonged winter darkness, with only military personnel and research teams inhabiting its desolate terrain. That year, engineers began drilling a tunnel beneath the permafrost to expand underground storage. Initial progress was methodical, careful excavation, reinforced steel supports, and regular progress reports. But everything changed when they reached a depth of 90 meters. The drill team broke through a wall of ice into an unexpected cavity. This space was unlike anything they had encountered. Smooth, symmetrical, and dry despite surrounding frost. No geological survey had ever documented this chamber. It was perfectly spherical, without cracks or signs of erosion, and eerily silent. Geophysicists were dispatched to investigate, descending with lights, meters, and sensors. Their equipment began failing in unpredictable patterns. Lights dimmed, batteries drained. The air remained breathable but unnaturally still, as if sound itself was reluctant to move. At the chamber's center stood a stone platform, unremarkable yet distinctly out of place. Smooth and rectangular, it radiated an inexplicable warmth. A junior officer named Morozov touched the stone and instantly collapsed. He remained alive but unresponsive, falling into a coma that lasted 11 days. Upon waking, Morozov's behavior became bizarre. He wrote obsessively in an unidentifiable language, using curved symbols in long, repeating sequences. He refused food for weeks, responding to questions with only one word before being transferred to a remote facility. Official records become sparse after this point. The chamber was sealed, the project halted, and all involved personnel were relocated or reassigned. Officially, the site was decommissioned due to seismic instability. Unofficially, guards maintained a presence at the entrance until the late 1980s. Years later, Morzovov spoke about the experience only once. He described the air as feeling watched, like standing on a stage with a curtain just beginning to lift. The village remains abandoned, with local rumors suggesting that after nightfall, one might hear footsteps that never quite catch up, or perhaps have already caught up. On a summer evening in 1998 near McCall, Idaho, a retired lineman named Carl Hensley followed his usual hiking routine through an overgrown service road by the Payette National Forest. Something felt different that night. As he approached a clearing where an old radio tower had once stood, a strange sensation overcame him. His ears began to ring with a dull, static-like noise. His handheld FM radio showed no signal, just white noise across all bands. The clearing ahead glowed faintly, almost imperceptibly. The air buzzed dry and charged, making his arm hairs stand on end. At the center of the field, amidst tall, wild grass, a shape moved, not an animal, but a tall, slim figure made of haze or smoke. It swayed without wind or sound. Kapal called out. The static grew louder. Carl stepped forward, getting within 10 feet of the figure. He saw it had no face, no color, just a human-like outline flickering like a broken television signal, existing between moments. Then he realized there were more figures. Suddenly, the static stopped. All figures turned toward Carl simultaneously. He couldn't move. His legs felt heavy, as if underwater. The air thickened. His watch stopped. His radio hissed and died. The figure shimmered one final time and vanished. The ringing in his ears faded. The grass swayed again, and the post stood perfectly still. Carl kept silent initially. Weeks later, he returned with a friend. The field was transformed. Knots were overgrown, everything pressed downward in a perfect circle. No plants, no insects, just scorched earth and a faint ozone scent. They never found any record of a tower having existed there, but Carl held on to the memory of that strange encounter. Years later, this incident would be whispered about. A mysterious event where the tundra occasionally shows a mild heat signature, where no animals nest, and where strange radio pulses seem to emerge from beneath the ice, like a distant rhythmic code calling out. The Blue Room, New Mexico, 2005. Paul Keener moved into a rental property on the outskirts of Espanola in 2005. The adobe house stood on a quiet desert patch, cheap and private, far from town noise. A small windowless side room painted an unnatural deep blue caught his attention. The landlord called it a storage nook, and Paul used it for boxes, tools, and an old reading chair. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then the dreams started. They weren't scary, just intensely vivid, a whispering voice reciting numbers, a slow-turning object suspended in air, a sensation of weightlessness and vast, silent distance. Each time he'd wake precisely at 3:33 a.m. No fear, just an unexplainable hum. Strange phenomena began to accumulate. The Blue Room remained 15 days cooler than the rest of the house, even in summer. Some mornings, Paul swore the walls felt damp, though no moisture was ever discovered. One night, he left a portable recorder in the room. Hours of white noise gave way to a soft mechanical click at 3:33 a.m., like a distant switch being thrown underground. The next morning, the chair had turned to face the opposite direction. Paul might have dismissed this as imagination, but the neighbors confirmed something was off. The house had been vacant for nearly a decade. Previous tenants always left within months, some abandoning their deposits. Bad dreams, one neighbor mumbled, and whispers of things appearing in mirrors made Paul feel increasingly watched. The sensation of being observed was confined to the Blue Room. One sleepless night, he sat in the chair with the door slightly ajar, lights extinguished, waiting. At 3:33 a.m., an unnatural glow filled the space. It wasn't from a bulb or outside source, but seemed to leak through the walls from somewhere beyond. For the briefest moment, the room's far side appeared deeper, as if a tunnel had momentarily opened just beyond vision. Then it vanished. A week later, Paul moved out. He never unpacked his boxes or returned for the deposit. His only message to the next tenant was a cryptic note in the mailbox. Don't sit in the chair after 3:30. In the vast expanse of New Mexico, where silence stretched as far as the eye could see, the summer of 1947 would become etched in history. Roswell, a modest town amid endless dirt roads and scrub brush, was about to become the center of a mystery that would captivate the world. The Foster Ranch lay 75 miles northwest of town, home to M. Brazel, a weathered man who knew the land like the back of his hand. Mac had spent years riding fences and checking windmills, his gaze as familiar with the sky as the ground beneath his feet. On July 2nd, the desert held its breath. Cicadas fell silent. Distant storm clouds flickered with lightning, promising no rain. Past midnight, a sound pierced the stillness, sharp and metallic, as if something enormous had torn through the atmosphere and shattered the night's calm. For Mac, such sounds were not unusual. The desert had its rhythms, its moods, sometimes groaning, sometimes singing. This quiet corner of the world, with its amber sunlight spilling over dry plains and crooked fences, would soon become part of a story that would challenge everything people thought they knew. The morning air, heavy with dust and dew, carried no hint of the extraordinary events about to unfold. In the town, life moved slowly. Conversations at diner counters and feed store shelves buzzed with the ordinary work, weather, small-town gossip. Nobody could have predicted that this unremarkable place would soon become synonymous with one of the most talked-about mysteries in modern history. As stars watched silently overhead, Mac rolled over and pulled his blanket closer, unaware that the night's strange sound would soon transform this quiet landscape into a global enigma, the Roswell incident. Mac rode out across the pasture under a merciless sun, scanning the landscape as he did every morning. The earth radiated heat and shimmering waves, and birds circled high overhead. A dry wind carried an unfamiliar scent, a burnt metallic trace that caught in the back of his throat. Something was different today. Nearly a quarter-mile wide, a field of strange debris stretched before him. Small metal fragments glinted silver and bronze, scattered like confetti. Some pieces looked like foil but defied logic. When he tried to crumple them, they smoothed out again without a mark. Other fragments were stiff and lightweight, etched with precise hieroglyphic-like symbols that meant nothing to him. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching against brittle grass. Crouching, he picked up a length of material and examined it carefully. It was unnaturally cold to the touch, flexible yet unbreakable. No screws, no rivets, no signs of human construction marked its surface. The silence struck him first. No birds chirped. No cattle grazed nearby. The world felt hollowed out, stripped of its usual sounds. Mac stood with his hat tipped back, squinting into the harsh light, taking in the entire scene. The scattered metal, the gouged earth, the profound stillness. He gathered several pieces of the mysterious wreckage and secured them in his saddlebag. Something had come down here, something that belonged to no known aircraft, balloon, or weather experiment. A strange certainty began to form in his mind. That evening, he sat alone on the porch, a cold cup of coffee beside him. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and fire before surrendering to dusk. Out in the darkening fields, the debris lay scattered beneath the stars, gleaming faintly like fallen pieces of the sky. His mind drifted to the sound from the previous night. That awful tearing, that hollow quiet, the strange symbols, the unnatural metal, the deep silence of the land. The air felt different now, charged with an unexplained tension. The night sky stretched over the New Mexico desert, a velvet canvas punctuated by soft starlight and the moon's pale glow. Silver light washed across barren land, illuminating jagged rocks and sagebrush. Everything was still, quiet enough to hear a breath, a distant coyote's call, or wind whispering through grass. Just past midnight on July 2nd, 1947, most in Roswell slept, drifting through dreams beneath humble roofs. But something was moving high above, beyond street lamps and radios. A fiery streak blazed across the heavens, a sudden blazing arc of light tearing through the calm night. It was unlike any shooting star, bright and fierce. Down on the Foster Ranch, Brazel's ears twitched. A sharp crack had jolted him awake earlier, a strange echoing boom that seemed to rattle the earth itself. As he stared through thin curtains, the night sky held its breath. Outside, cool desert air carried the scent of sage and distant pine. Beneath that familiar aroma, something new and alien lingered. Mac rose slowly, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside. The ground was cool beneath his feet. Stars blazed impossibly bright in the unpolluted sky. Scanning the horizon, his eyes sharp in the moonlight, he saw it. A faint glow low on the far edge of the pasture, a distant flicker of fire. Later that night, Max stepped into the cool air. Stars above were brilliant, endless, cold, and silent. Wind carried a low whistle through the canyons, and far off, a coyote howled. Lonely, thin, and distant. Something had happened out there. Though he couldn't yet articulate it, Mac Brazil understood in his bones that whatever came down from the sky wasn't meant for this world. Holding a sliver of impossible metal, he whispered to the dark, "What the hell are you?" The desert remained unsettled, as if it had taken a breath and not yet let it go. The desert lay quiet under the dark earth as Mac rode forward, the familiar creak of his saddle a comfort in the strange silence. His heart raced as he approached the source of an eerie, pulsing orange light dancing behind the scrub. What he found was beyond anything he could have imagined. A crater scorched black and smoking softly broke the earth open. Scattered across the clearing, gleaming metal shards lay twisted and warped, some glowing faintly from residual heat. Under the moonlight, these pieces shimmered with surfaces smooth and utterly alien, wisps of smoke curled upward, mingling with the desert breeze. Only occasional crackling wood and shifting debris disturbed the deep silence. Dismounting, Mac walked among the fragments, his heart pounding. The metal was remarkable. Light as a feather, yet unbreakable. Some pieces bore intricate, delicate symbols etched into their surfaces. Others appeared almost transparent, with a faint internal luminescence. When he touched a fragment, it was cold and smooth. Humming so softly the vibration was barely perceptible. What had fallen here? Not a plane. There were no engines, no familiar bolts or wiring. This was something else. Something not of this world. A shiver ran down his spine as the wind whispered through the desert grass. Carefully, he gathered several pieces and tucked them into his saddlebag. By morning, whispers had already begun in Roswell. Rumors spread of a flying disc crashed in the desert. The military claimed it was just a weather balloon, but those who saw the wreckage knew differently. Something had fallen from the sky that night, something not made by human hands. The desert would never be the same. As morning arrived, soft sunlight kissed the dusty earth, painting the endless sky in pale gold and rose. Cool. Still air carried the faint scent of dry sagebrush, marking the beginning of a day that would change everything. The desert was stirring from its long, peaceful slumber, a gentle breeze weaving through tall grasses and carrying whispers of something extraordinary. At the Foster Ranch, Brazel's mind was heavy with the previous night's discovery. Strange metal fragments scorched earth and an otherworldly crackling sound replayed in his memory like a vivid dream too intense to dismiss. Word spread quickly through Roswell. By midday, neighbors exchanged hushed conversations over fences and in the local diner. Some saw the tale as another exaggerated rancher's story born from restless imaginations. Others were captivated by quiet excitement, their eyes alight with wonder and mystery. A small group of townspeople ventured toward the ranch, moving cautiously through dusty fields. They carefully avoided disturbing the delicate evidence scattered across the land. Soft, uncertain voices discussed the strange wreckage. One held up a slender, silvery shard that caught sunlight in shimmering waves. "It looks like nothing we've ever seen," someone murmured. Another replied softly, "No plane. No pilot could have survived something like this." Rumors began to take root like desert wildflowers after a rare rain. Tales emerged of strange lights and objects moving too fast to be explained by weather balloons or military tests. Some claimed to have seen glimpses of otherworldly craft in the night sky before the crash, while others whispered about shadowy figures and unexplained sounds in the surrounding hills. The military responded with swift precision. Higher command had issued orders, and soldiers from the nearby Roswell Army Airfield arrived quietly, their faces set with determined seriousness. The small town buzzed with anticipation, the desert holding its secrets just a little while longer. The morning was hushed, with only the faintest hint of dawn painting the eastern sky. Major Jesse Marcel arrived early at the crash site, his professional composure masking the growing sense of mystery. The area was quickly secured, with tents and barriers keeping curious onlookers at a distance. As Marcel carefully examined the scattered debris, he noticed something extraordinary. The metal fragments were unlike anything he'd encountered before, lightweight yet incredibly strong, with strange symbols etched into their surfaces. His gloved hands moved methodically, each piece revealing more questions than answers. Whispers had already begun to spread through Roswell. Locals spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences. Some described flashes of light near the ranch before dawn. Others mentioned a low, steady humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. Children recounted glimpses of shapes moving impossibly fast against the moonlit sky. The town found itself caught between skepticism and an inexplicable sense of wonder. People craved answers but feared what those answers might reveal. The military's official explanation was terse and simple. A weather balloon had crashed, nothing more. But something didn't add up. Witnesses who came forward with their accounts were quickly silenced or dismissed. The military's grip on information tightened, and rumors of a cover-up began to circulate. The desert, vast and silent, seemed to hold its breath. Underneath the endless sky, a mystery was taking shape. Whispers carried by the wind spoke of something extraordinary, something that would challenge everything. People thought they knew. The world was on the cusp of awakening to a truth that would change everything. As Marcel continued his investigation, the line between known and unknown blurred. The debris told a story that official reports could not explain. Soft, insistent murmurs seemed to rise from the very ground, beckoning those brave enough to listen and understand. The base stirred with familiar military rhythms, gravel crunching, a generator's low hum, and officers exchanging crisp morning orders. Yet, something different lingered in the air. A subtle current Marcel could sense deep in his bones before any message arrived. Years of intelligence work had honed Marcel's instincts. Soft-spoken and meticulous, he'd learned to read between the lines, to notice the smallest hesitations and story shifts. This morning, something felt unusual from the start. The dawn report spoke of an extraordinary discovery, an object found on a remote ranch northwest of Roswell, scattered with unfamiliar debris and strange symbols that local law enforcement couldn't comprehend. Marcel listened intently during the briefing, absorbing every detail without interruption. When it concluded, he simply folded the note, tucked it into his jacket, and declared, "I'll go myself. The Jeep was already prepared." The drive took him through a vast, silent landscape. Desert stretched endlessly around him, punctuated by scattered fences and dry riverbeds. A hawk circled overhead as morning light cast long shadows across the terrain. His mind worked through potential explanations. Experimental aircraft, a downed satellite, perhaps a Soviet surveillance device. Yet none of these theories felt right. Something in the sheriff's and rancher's descriptions carried a weight that suggested this was far from routine. They had been genuinely unsettled by what they'd found. By the time Marcel arrived at the Foster Ranch, the sun had fully risen, its golden light spreading across the dry ground. Embrazel waited by the fence, hat tilted low, arms crossed. A minimal nod greeted Marcel as the Jeep rolled to a stop. "Morning," Mac said simply. Marcel stepped out, extending his hand. Mac Brazil, the rancher, led Marcel to the crash site on horseback. The wide pasture showed clear signs of disturbance, as if something had violently skidded or burst apart. Debris glittered everywhere, scattered in long, uneven trails across the field. Marcel examined the fragments closely. One piece was unlike anything he had encountered before, thin and metallic, resembling foil but impossibly resilient. When he folded it in his hands, it bent without creasing and instantly returned to its original shape. No seams, no weld marks revealed how it was made. Another shard caught his attention. Delicate, symmetrical symbols covered its surface, not painted or scratched, but somehow integrated into the metal itself. These markings didn't match any language Marcel recognized. He traced the intricate grooves with his fingers, feeling their precision. "What do you make of it?" Mac asked after a long silence. Marcel stood slowly, the fragment still in his hand. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But it's not from anything I've seen in my time." Hours passed as they collected samples, carefully wrapping each piece in canvas and filling boxes. Marcel made meticulous notes, though he struggled to find words adequate to describe what he was witnessing. By late afternoon, the Jeep was loaded. Mac watched with narrowed eyes as the strange materials were secured. Marcel confirmed he would take the materials back to base for examination. No promises were made about understanding their origin. A simple handshake sealed their encounter, and Mac turned back toward his home, disappearing into the shimmering heat. During the quiet ride home, the setting sun painted the hills in deep ochres and rust. Marcel's mind raced with unanswered questions. What had fallen in that field? Where did it come from? Something significant felt like it had just begun. Instead of heading directly to the base, he made an unexpected stop at home. His wife was out, but his young son played in the yard. Marcel called him over and gently handed him a piece of the mysterious material. "Take a look at this," he said. Night was falling as Marcel pulled the Jeep into the base, the sky darkening and stars beginning to scatter like silver dust overhead. He handed the vehicle to the guards and stepped out into the cooling air, his mind drifting to the material he had carefully collected and repacked earlier. The boy's wide-eyed wonder echoed in his memory. "It's like magic," he had whispered. Marcel had agreed, quietly acknowledging the strange nature of what they'd found. The base had settled into its nighttime rhythm. Soft radio chatter and the distant creak of a supply truck blended with the buzz of a flickering lamp outside the main hangar. A tired mechanic raised a hand in silent greeting as Marcel approached the intelligence office. He moved quickly to the Jeep's rear, where the boxes remained tightly secured under canvas. The breeze played along the tarp's edges as he unfastened the ties. With deliberate care, he lifted the first box and carried it inside. The small office was dimly lit by a single desk lamp, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Captain Sheridan Cavett waited, slightly rumpled with a steaming coffee mug in hand. "You brought it?" Cavett asked. "I brought it," Marcel replied, setting the box down gently. They opened the lid together, the lamplight falling on the fragments inside. Cavett reached for a thin, metallic strip, bending it between his fingers. But when he released it, the strip sprang back to its original shape as if nothing had happened. Smooth, impossibly light. A flawless surface. "What is this?" he murmured. Marcel remained silent. His hand lifted a second piece, a curved section with dull silver and faint violet tones that shimmered subtly in the light. Its edges were clean and cold. Just barely visible on the inner curve, a line of symbols traced delicate, intricate characters, like a language not meant to be read but remembered. Cavett moved to another box, lifting what appeared to be a beam or support. Hollow yet sturdy, it was featherlight. They examined the fragments in silence, their confusion growing heavier with each piece they studied. "This isn't from any aircraft I've ever seen," Cavett finally said. "It's not from any aircraft anyone's seen," Marcel replied. Their investigation continued. One piece bore an odd texture, almost like snakeskin, but smooth and cold. Another held a thin membrane stretched across a delicate frame resembling a wing, except it had no moving parts, no hinges or bolts. Everything seemed grown, not constructed. No wires, no electronics, no motors or propellers emerged. The materials defied everything they understood about engineering. For over an hour, they worked in low voices, passing pieces between them like fragile relics from another time. The room warmed under the desk lamp, and still no explanation presented itself. Eventually, Cavett leaned back, rubbing his forehead. Maybe a high-altitude test vehicle. Something experimental, top secret. Marcel's response was pointed. Why weren't they briefed? Why would it crash on a remote ranch with no retrieval plan? And those mysterious symbols? Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but laden with unspoken implications. The unvoiced question hung in the air. What if this wasn't from here at all? Marcel eventually stood, methodically repacking the fragments. Each piece was wrapped carefully in cloth and returned to its box. Cavett assisted, their movements slow and reverent. Once sealed, Marcel carried the box to secure storage, locked it, and handed the key to the night watch officer. Without another word, he left the building. The night air was cool and still. Crickets chirped softly in the weeds, a single spotlight casting a pale beam across the quiet landscape. Marcel's mind swirled with fragments of memory as he returned home. The quiet streets seemed to hold their breath. His small room absorbed him, jacket draped, water untouched, boots still on. He sat on the bed's edge, hands resting. The night's events played behind his closed eyes. Twisting metal, pale symbols, moonlight on strange surfaces. Voices echoed the rancher's calm words, the children's wide-eyed wonder, Cavett's stunned expression. Leaning back, he gazed at the ceiling. Beyond the plaster, stars wheeled silently overhead. An object had fallen through darkness, crashing in absolute silence. This wasn't from any known country. This wasn't from Earth. The thought returned, soft but persistent. Something extraordinary had arrived, leaving behind a landscape of unanswered questions. As sleep approached, the feeling remained, a gentle, insistent wave. Morning broke over Roswell. Warm sunlight spilled across barracks and gravel paths, casting everything in a soft amber glow. While most of the town stirred, brewing coffee and unfolding newspapers, something significant was unfolding at the Army airfield. In the small public information office, a corporal typed carefully. An officer watched over his shoulder as brief lines took shape. The statement was simple, measured. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday. The intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of a local rancher and the sheriff's office of Chaves County. No elaboration, just enough to ignite curiosity. By mid-morning, the release had spread through local press and wire services, setting the stage for what was to come. Flying disc buzzed through conversations from town to town. Radars flickered. Voices in diners, barber shops, and street corners swirled with speculation and disbelief. At the Roswell Daily Record, an editor stared at a typed statement, reading it repeatedly. The headline formed almost by itself. AF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. 5 words that would resonate through decades. Phones erupted. Some callers crackled with excitement, others with skepticism, but nobody remained neutral. A quiet desert town suddenly stood at the epicenter of something extraordinary. Main Street's diner hummed with whispered theories. One voice murmured about a glowing object. Another spoke of a lightning-fast streak across night skies. Theories flew. Russian technology? Something not of this world? Nervous laughter punctuated the speculation, but underlying tension was palpable. On the military base, excitement dissolved quickly. High-level communications arrived, urgent and firm. The message was unambiguous: retract the statement. Marcel understood. The mystery had snowballed beyond control. Military leadership wanted to reclaim the narrative. A new statement emerged, clinical and concise. The recovered object wasn't a disc, merely a weather balloon. Standard equipment misidentified by an overzealous officer and a well-meaning rancher. A photograph was staged. Marcel stood wearily beside broken balloon fragments and foil-like material, nothing like the original discovery. Press cameras clicked. The image would circulate nationwide. The headline transformed. Excitement morphed into explanation. Mystery became mistake, yet for those who witnessed the initial evidence, Marcel, M., Rizal, and a select few, the retraction rang hollow. Marcel sat alone in his quarters, the room dim and lit only by a soft lamp on his desk. A distant radio station played a faint piano ballad, barely cutting through the static. He removed his cap and rubbed his eyes, his thoughts returning to the wreckage he had encountered. The impossible metal haunted him. Its strange surface that bent light in unnatural ways, the etched symbols, the material that seemed to fold and remember its own shape. He recalled his son's wonder when holding a piece in their kitchen, and Cavit's profound silence. They had no words to describe what they had witnessed. Officially, the matter was closed. The wreckage had been flown to Fort Worth, destined to be examined or perhaps simply to vanish. No further statements would be made. It would be reduced to a weather balloon, nothing more. Outside, the desert air cooled. Crickets began their soft evening chorus. A distant dog barked once, then fell silent. Across Roswell, people turned off radios, folded newspapers, and drew curtains. Lights clicked off in homes throughout the town. Yet before sleeping, many gazed out their windows, looking up at the stars. Something had passed overhead, leaving only the faintest trace. The official silence was already settling, like dust slowly covering an unexpected memory. The morning broke quietly over the Foster Ranch. Pale light rose behind the hills, turning low clouds a soft apricot. Gentle wind moved through the grasses, and birds chirped faintly. A lone steer bellowed beyond the barn. Mac Brazel stood outside his small home, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. He felt something different in the air, a barely perceptible shift that made the hairs on his neck stand up. It wasn't just the lingering memory of the strange wreckage. It wasn't just the silence that followed. The desert air hung heavy as Max studied the tracks at the edge of his property, deep tire marks pressed into the dirt, with scattered footprints near the wreckage site. These weren't his boots, not his horse's prints, and certainly not made by the sheriff's men. Someone else had been here, and recently. They hadn't come for a friendly chat. No vehicle sounds had broken the night's silence, but that meant little in this vast landscape where sound behaved unpredictably. Near the fence line, he found cigarette butts. One still carried the faint trace of recent smoke. Morning chores couldn't shake the unsettling sensation. Mac fed the animals and checked the pasture perimeter, moving carefully and scanning the surrounding hills. No one was visible, yet the feeling of being watched persisted. By mid-morning, his decision was made. He saddled his horse and rode into Roswell, which shimmered under the summer heat. The streets bustled more than earlier in the week. Reporters, townspeople, and unfamiliar men in suits mingled about. A few acknowledged him, but Mac kept his head down, hat low over his brow. At the sheriff's office, he tied his horse and entered. The door creaked softly behind him. Sheriff George Wilcox looked up, greeting him. Something had changed in Mac's demeanor. The previous curiosity and disbelief had been replaced by hesitation and a hint of fear. "You got a minute?" Mac asked quietly. They moved to the small back office, leather and dust hanging in the air. Mac closed the door and remained standing. "I've been thinking," he began. "Maybe I shouldn't have said anything." He explained the strange tracks on his land, the shadow near the well, and the persistent feeling of being watched. unidentified footprints. Big ones. No horses, just unknown boots. Wilcox leaned forward, listening intently. Something wasn't right, and they both knew it. Mac was reluctant to talk about what happened near the barn. The sheriff studied him quietly, sensing something was off. "Someone trying to scare you away?" he asked. Mac didn't commit to an answer, only stating he wasn't going to repeat his story. Will Wilcox offered support. "If anyone's snooping around, let me know. We'll keep an eye out." Mac remained silent, his gaze drifting across the room before settling on the door. A reporter's knock interrupted the moment. Word had spread about Mac's return, and the press was hungry for details about the strange Roswell incident. Meeting the reporter near the doorway, Mac faced a polite, well-dressed man with a notepad. "Mr. Brosel," the reporter said smoothly, "just a few clarifications." Mac's response was hollow and brief. "I made a mistake. Found a weather balloon. Didn't know what it was. The Army said I was wrong." His tone was final. Later that day, Mac left Roswell as quietly as he'd arrived. Locals watched, whispering theories. Some thought he'd been warned, others believed he was embarrassed. No one had real answers. That evening, Mac sat on his porch as the sun sank behind the hills. His cattle moved uneasily. An unfamiliar metallic scent drifted on the wind. Bright stars emerged overhead. Leaning back, Mac folded his hands and stared into the night. Whatever had happened, he knew he'd never be allowed to explain it fully. At Roswell Army Airfield, the days following the discovery passed seemingly without incident. But beneath the surface, a different kind of movement was taking shape. Quiet, shadowy, intent on concealment rather than revelation. As silence crept through the base, the aftermath of the mysterious incident began to unravel. Men who once eagerly discussed the wreckage now avoided eye contact, their conversations dying abruptly when strangers drew near. Barcel discovered his meticulously prepared report had vanished overnight. A detailed account of the wreckage, its inexplicable symbols, and extraordinary material simply gone. Nearby, a mechanic who had helped unload the crates was suddenly transferred hundreds of miles away without explanation or farewell. The fragments of the strange object began to disappear as well. What had been a carefully cataloged collection of metal shards and delicate materials now left only empty spaces behind locked doors. Witnesses saw a crate stored in a secure corner vanish by the next day, leaving nothing but silence. Photographs from the initial investigation suffered the same fate. Negatives and prints were confiscated, shredded, or simply erased from archives. Those who had handled the cameras became tight-lipped, their expressions distant and guarded. Local residents who once freely shared stories about strange lights and eerie sounds now glanced nervously over their shoulders, afraid of who might be listening. A nurse who had overheard hushed discussions in the hospital corridors was quietly transferred away, her absence noted but never discussed. Major Marcel felt the growing weight of isolation pressing down on him. His request for investigation updates went unanswered, and follow-up inquiries were met with polite deflections or sudden changes of subject. The story that had once captivated the town was being systematically erased. As tangible evidence disappeared, so did the words describing it. Names vanished from documents. Locations were altered or completely removed. Conversations were carefully rephrased, facts manipulated, the truth being slowly, methodically buried under layers of silence and misdirection. The silence settled around Marcel like a heavy cloak as he sat outside his quarters. Stars emerged, shimmering like distant lanterns across the sky that deepened from orange to indigo. He watched the sun sink behind distant messes, thinking not of discoveries, but of vanishings. The desert breeze stirred dry grass at his feet, carrying the softest hint of memory. Something lost, something hidden. Marcel closed his eyes, feeling the faint breath of forgotten stories. The pieces he once held, metal fragments with unexplained symbols, were now slipping away. The world might never fully know what happened in that lonely stretch of New Mexico desert. But for those who had been there, who had touched the impossible, the silence itself spoke volumes. The story remained hidden, waiting beneath the stars. Somewhere else, far from the dusty plains, a quiet, windowless room held its breath. Behind locked doors and guarded corridors, a small group of men gathered under the weight of unspoken truths. Late into the night, they sat around a heavy wooden table scattered with photographs, documents, and carefully wrapped samples. Crisp uniforms and tailored suits filled the room. A senior officer's low, firm voice broke the careful stillness. "What we have recovered," he said, "is unlike anything in our known arsenals or research." He spoke of material both light and strong, resistant to heat, defying conventional explanation. Symbols etched onto fragments matched no known language or code. The truth seemed to blur, slipping through the fingers of time itself. Not with force, but with a quiet, deliberate patience. Like dust carried on the desert wind, evidence scattered and faded, leaving behind only a whisper. A trace barely felt but never fully gone. Words settle. One official spoke carefully about disclosure risks. Panic could ensue if the wrong information reached the public. Society was not prepared for such a revelation. Strategic concerns loomed large. Technology, diplomacy, national security. The room had grown quiet. A younger officer voiced a critical point. If word got out, an unprecedented arms race might erupt. They could lose control of the narrative entirely. Another voice countered this perspective, arguing that secrecy breeds suspicion. History had shown the dangers of hiding the truth. Multiple eyewitness accounts, photographs, and physical samples provided compelling evidence. The implications were profound. One man questioned whether this might be a foreign experiment, perhaps Soviet technology. The officer dismissed this theory swiftly. No radar had detected any aircraft in the area. The witnesses described a speed and maneuverability that defied earthly technology. The men around the table were more than bureaucrats. They were custodians of a secret that could fundamentally reshape the world. Each understood the immense burden they carried. After lengthy deliberation, a consensus began to form. The findings would remain strictly confidential. Physical evidence would be secured and removed from public view. Witnesses would be instructed to maintain absolute silence. The press would be carefully managed to prevent speculation. If mentioned at all, the incident would be reframed as a misidentified weather balloon, a simple, explainable mistake. A senior official summarized their decision. Stability both at home and abroad was paramount. They must prevent fear and chaos from spreading. Quiet orders were drafted. A precise chain of command would enforce this new narrative. The delicate balance of secrecy and control was set in motion. One by one, the men rose and gathered their papers. Their footsteps echoed softly against the cold floor. As they left the room, the door closed with a gentle click, sealing the secret away. Outside, the world continued, entirely unaware of the silent pact just made. The legacy of Roswell. Years drifted by, and the landscape around Roswell settled back into its timeless quiet. Sunlight painted the desert in endless amber and gold, while wind whispered through sagebrush and muskoi, carrying memories both faint and vivid. What began as a strange incident slowly transformed into folklore. News reports faded from headlines, replaced by the steady rhythm of daily life. Yet beneath the surface of ordinary conversation, the story remained alive, passed quietly between generations like a treasured secret. Families spoke in hushed tones. Neighbors remembered the unusual summer excitement. Witnesses held their memories like delicate, precious things, too complex to explain, too strange to forget. Decades passed, and Roswell became more than a location. It became a symbol, a touchstone for the curious and skeptical. Books appeared on shelves. Documentaries flickered across screens. Films reimagined the incident in vibrant colors and dramatic scenes. Each retelling added layers of interpretation, weaving fact and fiction into a captivating tapestry that drew millions. Some stories grew wild and tall, stretching beyond truth to entertain. Others sought to dismiss and explain, grounding the events firmly in the known world. Yet one question endured: what really happened in those quiet New Mexico fields? For those who lived through it, Jesse Marcel, the rancher M. Brazel, the officers who handled the wreckage, the legacy was deeply personal. They carried a secret few could understand, a knowledge that quietly and profoundly shaped their lives. Marcel's son remembered his father's soft, careful stories, never fully revealing the whole truth. Brazel carried his memories with a mixture of wonder and regret, knowing some questions might remain unanswered. And Cavett, like many others, lived with the silent echo of something extraordinary hidden behind official words and carefully crafted narratives. The mystery lived on, not as a tale of fear, but as a gentle invitation to wonder. The night envelops the small farm, a quiet November evening in 1974 nestled within the wooded hills of rural Pennsylvania. Harold has just finished locking up the barn, his family inside, the fire crackling softly. Outside, an unusual stillness descends. No crickets chirp, no wind rustles. The silence carries an unexpected weight. Suddenly, a low resonant hum vibrates through Harold's chest, deeper than any engine sound he's heard before. He looks skyward, expecting a helicopter or plane, but sees only a cloudless sky and a thin crescent moon. Then the lights appear. First one, then two, then a complete ring hovering above the old wooden barn. They glow softly, white with a bluish tinge, pulsing rhythmically around the edges of something just beyond clear perception. The craft remains perfectly silent, suspended merely 30 feet above the barn roof. A pale light beam stretches downward, moving slowly like a searchlight. Harold stands motionless, transfixed. In those quiet moments between waking and dreaming, stories like these whisper on the edge of understanding. They remind us how vast and mysterious the universe remains. Sometimes the most profound experiences lie not in concrete answers, but in the questions that linger. Some encounters never make headlines. They exist in the memories of ordinary people, quiet witnesses to events that challenge our understanding of what's possible. These stories drift like soft murmurs in the darkness, carried on a breeze that speaks of unknown possibilities. As night settles, stars overhead bear silent witness. The story waits, patient and peaceful, inviting us to wonder about the mysteries that surround us. Harold stood frozen, unable to move or call out, his breath hanging in the cold air. Something unseen seemed to pin him to the earth, as if time itself had slowed down. Inside the house, his wife had also noticed the strange lights. She grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside, but the moment she stepped onto the porch, all power disappeared. The darkness was eerie. Her weak flashlight cast more shadows than light, and the air carried an odd metallic scent. Above the barn, a glowing object hovered. She watched in horror as a beam swept across the ground, briefly illuminating the cow pen before vanishing without a sound. Minutes later, power returned as if nothing unusual had occurred. But morning revealed a shocking scene. Every single cow was gone. The pens were empty, with no signs of struggle, no broken fences, no blood, nothing. Strange blackened circles marked the grass and near the barn. The ground was scorched. The metal water trough looked warped from extreme heat. Yet the barn remained untouched. Local police filed a report, but they had little to investigate. No tracks, no suspects, just a traumatized family with an unbelievable story. The farm dog wouldn't go near the barn for weeks, and the scorched grass never regrew. Harold was deeply affected, becoming quiet and withdrawn. By the following spring, he sold the farm and moved his family into town. When anyone asked about that night, Harold would simply shake his head and say, "Some things ain't meant for us to understand." Over time, the story became local folklore. Kids whispered about the ghost barn, but those who knew Harold understood he wasn't one for fabrication. His practical wife refused to discuss the incident entirely. The new landowners claimed nothing strange has happened. Yet on cold nights, if you walk past the old barn, you might hear a faint, distant hum, leaving you to wonder what visited the farm that November night. Carvey was a 38-year-old postal worker who loved walking through the pine woods near Roven even on the coldest days. Snow covered the ground in a thick, silent blanket, and heavy clouds hung low in the sky. The air was sharp and biting, but he didn't mind. His boots crunched softly on the forest path, surrounded by old pines with their dark, twisted limbs standing tall and silent. That night was perfectly still, without even a whisper of wind. Just the occasional creak of branches under snow's weight. Hands deep in his coat pockets, Carvey's breath formed steady puffs in the cold air. Something ahead caught his attention. At first, it looked like a tree trunk, but as he drew closer, he realized it was different. Too smooth, too tall, completely motionless. He stopped. The figure was about 7 feet tall, with a narrow frame and skin so pale it seemed to glow against the dark trees. Thin limbs and a slightly tilted, elongated head. But the eyes, those were what truly stopped him. Large, completely black, with a faint red glow from within. They stared, unblinking. Harvey felt no immediate fear, just a strange confusion and a dreamlike paralysis. His breathing slowed, and time seemed to stretch. The figure didn't move closer or make any threatening gestures. It simply watched. Then, slowly and deliberately, it raised its left arm and pointed into the woods beside him. When Carvey turned to look, he saw only darkness and trees. Turning back, the figure had vanished. No sound, no footsteps, no wind, just a faint warmth hung in the air, as if a stove had been burning nearby. For weeks after, vivid dreams haunted him. He'd wake drenched in sweat with fragmented memories that felt foreign, tall metal hallways, sourceless pulsing lights, a low hum he could feel in his teeth. Nosebleeds, headaches, and static shocks became common. Years passed before he shared his story. Online, he discovered similar accounts. Stories of watchers, silent figures with glowing red eyes appearing in isolated areas. He wasn't alone. A summer of unexplained mysteries gripped the quiet village of Sharminster in Dorset, England. What began as a single farmer's strange encounter would soon become a series of unsettling events that would haunt the local community. On a warm, damp August evening, with the sky hanging pink and the air thick with hay and sea salt, the farmer was returning home after dusk. As he passed the church's stone wall, something caught his eye. A soft blue light hovered above a gravestone, shimmering like moonlight on water before vanishing just as quickly. He kept the sighting to himself, but he wasn't alone. Soon, two schoolboys would experience something similar. Sneaking out with torches, they witnessed multiple pale blue lights drifting among the gravestones. These weren't ordinary lights. They moved with an unnatural deliberateness too slow and controlled to be insects or optical illusions. As the boys approached, the lights remained suspended in the air. One of them claimed to hear a whispered voice, not quite human, speaking words he couldn't comprehend. His companion was so overwhelmed that he fainted on the spot, later unable to recall anything except a profound sense of being watched and judged. The sightings continued. The local vicar spotted the lights through his office window and never spoke of it again. A retired nurse walking her dog swore she saw a light pass directly through a stone cross. Her dog's reaction was telling, first barking wildly, then whimpering for days afterward. Always blue, always silent, always appearing only at night. These mysterious lights became a phenomenon that defied explanation. The village was left wondering about the secret that haunted their churchyard. Meanwhile, in another time and place, KV carried his own unexplained memory. A year after a bizarre sighting on a trail, he found himself unable to forget the pale figure, its gesture toward the trees, the unnerving stillness. He never walked that trail again, sometimes wondering what might have happened if he'd followed where the figure pointed. Some part of him was relieved he hadn't discovered the truth. Whatever was there had been waiting, watching. A photographer from the next town camped out in the churchyard, determined to document what locals had been whispering about. Hours passed in stillness, the night holding its breath. Just before midnight, everything changed. His camera died without warning, battery completely drained. An unexpected heaviness settled in the air, silence pressing down like a weight. Then the lights appeared. At least 5 orbs, each about the size of a grapefruit, moved with an unsettling sense of purpose. They circled the central gravestone in a precise pattern, pulsing softly as if locked in some cryptic conversation. One by one, they rose straight up into the darkness, vanishing without sound or trace. After that singular night, the churchyard returned to its usual quiet. Mossy gravestones stood undisturbed. Villagers gradually stopped discussing the incident, as if by some unspoken agreement, the August event would fade into collective memory. Yet some claim that on late summer nights, when mist clings low to the ground, a strange presence lingers. Walk past the church and you might feel an inexplicable chill, sense something watching from just beyond perception. Listen closely, and you might catch a faint, ancient hum, a whisper of something that once called the dead to luminous life. It was a cloudless spring night in eastern Montana. The sky stretched endless and black, studded with pinpricks of starlight. Dave, a long-haul trucker, was crossing the plains with a load of industrial pipe, deliberately avoiding the busy interstate. No towns interrupted the landscape. Just after midnight, only the steady wheel hum and CB radio static kept him company on a route he knew well. Something felt different this time. Headlights revealed nothing but empty road, rolling grasslands stretching into darkness on both sides. Suddenly, the radio went silent. Complete absence of sound. Dave checked the equipment, assuming a technical failure. But then strange things began happening. Dashboard lights flickered erratically. The speedometer wavered. The truck's engine coughed briefly before continuing as if nothing had occurred. Slowing the rig, Dave scanned the sky, and then he saw them. Black triangles flew low, almost touching the road's surface, massive and flat. Each craft spanned the size of a city block, with soft white lights marking its corners. They moved with an impossible precision, slow, completely silent. Dave pulled his truck over, stepping out into an atmosphere that felt unnaturally heavy. The air was thick and electric, like a thunderstorm suspended in anticipation. 3 craft hovered steadily overhead, maybe a few hundred feet up, gliding forward with smooth geometric motion. He stood motionless, unable to track how long he watched. An odd pressure settled in his chest. Not pain, just an inexplicable weight. Then everything shifted. A single blink and suddenly he was driving again. Road signs had changed. The sky looked slightly different, as if an hour had vanished. His dash lights returned to normal, the radio still dead. His coffee sat cold in the cup holder. Checking his GPS, Dave realized he was 31 miles further than he remembered, with no recollection of the journey. His always running dash cam had captured something strange. At the precise moment of the triangle sightings, the footage scrambled into static before resuming miles down the highway. Dave said nothing, not to his dispatcher, not to anyone. A week later, an anonymous email arrived with a file. The attached dashcam footage showed the 3 triangles floating perfectly above the road, framed in absolute darkness. He deleted it the next day, unwilling to dig deeper. On long, quiet drives, Dave sometimes looks skyward, wondering how many others have witnessed these silent craft that seem to slip through time and space, leaving only a heavy, unexplained silence in their wake. Geologists ventured deep into the Siberian wilderness. Their mission focused on a bizarre section of forest where technology failed and compasses went haywire. They were seasoned professionals, accustomed to harsh environments and isolation, but nothing could prepare them for what lay ahead. The landscape transformed dramatically. Initially, thick Siberian pines stood tall and familiar. Around 20 kilometers in, everything changed. Trees became pale, almost translucent, their bark smooth as polished marble. An unnatural silence descended. Snow beneath their feet grew brittle, acquiring a faint, greenish hue. Glass fragments littered the forest floor, smooth, rippling panes in varying states. Some were clear, others shimmered with rainbow colors. The surrounding trees were disturbingly warped, bent away from a central point as if an explosion had occurred without heat or sound. At the heart of this anomaly, a perfect 60-foot circle. No snow, no debris, just scorched soil fused into a black glass surface. No tracks, no signs of life. Their equipment went haywire. Batteries died instantly. Cameras malfunctioned. Metal warped inexplicably. One compass spun so violently it shattered. Vadim stepped into the circle before anyone could stop him. The air inside subtly shimmered. His voice didn't echo. His movements seemed slightly out of sync with reality. He smiled, walked further in, and then simply vanished. No sound, no flash, just gone. As the team rushed forward, most were immediately overwhelmed. Nausea, dizziness, nosebleeds. They dragged each other from the forest. A rescue team arrived 2 days later to find nothing, no circle, no campsite, no evidence of their extraordinary encounter. Vadim was never located. Officially, he was listed as lost to terrain conditions. The team never returned to fieldwork. Within a year, several developed rare cancers. Satellite images would later reveal strange, shifting heat signatures in the area, perfect warm circles appearing randomly during winter. In hushed whispers, Russian folklore began to tell a strange tale of a forest where reality bends and something inexplicable lurks just beyond perception. Lac St. Jean stretches wide and deep in Quebec's northern wilderness, surrounded by dense pine forests and narrow roads. The lake holds its silence like a secret, a perfect backdrop for those seeking to escape the city or perhaps something more mysterious. In the summer of 2003, 4 young students pitched their tents along the southern edge of the lake. The night was clear, the sky cloudless, and their campfire crackled as they cooked sausages and shared laughter. After midnight, everything changed. The lake went unnaturally still. No wind. No water movement. The fire hissed as the breeze vanished completely. Then it appeared. A massive oval-shaped object hung about 100 feet above the water. Unlike typical UFO stories, this craft didn't flash or buzz. It simply existed smooth as a centuries-worn stone, its metallic surface unbroken by seams. Strange lights ringed its center, glowing in colors that defied description, somewhere between violet and green, shifting without pattern. The campers stood frozen, none reaching for a phone or flashlight. They just stared. Marianne broke the silence, pointing to something impossible. Directly beneath the craft, a figure stood on the lake's surface, not in the water, but on it. Impossibly tall and slender, with limbs hanging low and skin pale, almost bluish. No face was visible, just the outline of something not quite human, yet not entirely foreign to the imagination. A loud pop from the campfire made them turn. When they looked back, both the craft and the figure had vanished. The silence remained. The water stayed perfectly motionless. One camper realized he'd been holding his breath, his chest aching from the tension. They didn't sleep that night. Come morning, they packed quickly, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Something had happened. Something they couldn't explain. The forest, the lake, they seemed to remember. Something had fallen here long ago. Something not meant for this world. They hadn't gone back to normal. The lake no longer felt safe. Digging through obscure online forums and translated threads, they uncovered stories. Decades of silent sightings emerged. Strange crafts hovering over remote Quebec lakes. Mysterious figures watching from water surfaces. Marianne never went camping again. Story 7. The Shepherd's Story. The Scottish Highlands stand as a realm of wind and silence. Stone walls and scattered sheep punctuate endless rolling moors, with distant glints of light breaking the landscape's monotony. In 1958, Ewan McNeil, an old shepherd, lived a solitary life near Glen Lyon, one of the region's most isolated valleys. His modest stone cottage and border collie Bramble were his only companions. Like many Highlanders of his time, Ewan was a man rooted in routine and local superstitions, spending days among the hills and nights by the fire. Just after sunset one evening, something peculiar caught Ewan's attention. A section of sky above the distant hill glowed an unnatural deep amber, remaining luminous while the surrounding horizon darkened. Minutes passed, and the light didn't fade. Instead, it began moving slowly, deliberately. Drawing closer, Ewan observed its shape, a tall vertical light pillar floating silently just above the ground, tracing the hill's contours. Shadowless and seemingly heatless, it emitted an eerie, pulsing presence. Bramble's low growl and bristling fur signaled something was wrong. The sheep started moving strangely, walking in a tight, unnatural circle, as if gently pulled by an invisible current. Ewan's voice inexplicably fell flat, producing no echo. No wind disturbed the scene. Then they appeared. 3 or 4 figures stood near the pillar, tall, slender, motionless. Their bodies defied human description, smooth, thin, with elongated heads and faces replaced by shimmering, reflective surfaces like living mirrors. Paralyzed, Ewan later described the experience as standing inside a deep dream. He recognized he was witnessing something beyond comprehension, yet paradoxically felt a strange sense of calm, neither welcomed nor threatened. Sinai Peninsula, a place of ancient silence where endless sand meets jagged mountains and deep starlit skies. In 1982, during a lull in regional conflict, Egyptian communication specialists worked at a remote outpost near the Jabal Musa range, far from civilization. Their nightly routine usually involved monitoring radio transmissions, static, coded chatter, and the steady hum of long-distance frequencies. But one night shattered that monotony. At precisely 2:13 a.m., every channel went completely silent. Not just quiet, but an oppressive, heavy silence. Adele, one of the technicians, noticed an unmarked frequency on their equipment. He carefully adjusted the dials and leaned closer. What came through was unlike anything they'd heard before. A low pulse like a metallic heartbeat, followed by a voice speaking an unrecognizable language. It was rhythmic, tonal, layered with an almost melodic hum. The temperature in the monitoring hut plummeted. Lights flickered. Outside, a dark spindle appeared hovering between mountain peaks, seamless matte, without windows or lights. One team member walked outside muttering in an unknown tongue, his movements disoriented and uncertain. When colleagues brought him back inside, he collapsed and slept for 12 hours. The strange signal persisted for exactly 33 minutes. Then it stopped. Something subtle yet profound had changed. The stars above the outpost seemed to have shifted slightly, as if space itself had been stretched and then released. One technician noticed all his watches were now off by precisely 7 seconds. Their commanding officer ordered all recordings destroyed, but Adele secretly kept a copy, preserving this inexplicable moment of desert mystery. Years later, the tape surfaced again when a visiting French researcher, specializing in rare languages, listened to its mysterious contents. Halfway through, the researcher reportedly went pale. The tones, he explained, did not match any human dialect, but instead carried precise mathematical intervals resembling a high-level code, suggesting a signal designed to teach or test. Adele chose never to play the tape again, and the researcher departed the next day without completing his study. Story 9 unfolded in the fall of 1969 at an isolated weather station perched on Maine's rugged coastline. Just outside Machiasport, this aging metal and glass structure stood sentinel where the Atlantic battered black rocks and thick mist rolled in from the sea. Walter Hensley, a former Navy meteorologist who preferred solitude, manned the station on rotating shifts. His assignment was straightforward: monitor barometric changes and transmit twice-daily reports to an inland research center. But one night, everything changed. A strange fog arrived with unnatural speed. The moon's silver line across the ocean vanished in an instant. Visibility dropped to 0. Radios crackled, static hummed through the walls, and then the lights failed. Walter scrambled for backup power. The generator started, but station sensors refused to cooperate. Dials spun wildly. Displays blinked random symbols. Through the observation window, he spotted something hovering just above the sea. A smooth, metallic sphere. It glowed with a faint bluish hue that seemed to sink into the water rather than reflect off it, remaining perfectly still and silent. Methodically, Walter logged every detail by hand. When he attempted to use the radio, he heard only a low modulated tone, not static, not a buzz, but a distinct pulse. From the fog emerged a shape, human-like but impossibly tall. Its silhouette shimmered slightly, like heat rising from a flame, moving steadily toward the station through fog that never parted. Walter retreated from the glass. The figure paused just 10 feet from the door. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. The fog evaporated in seconds. The light vanished. Sensors rebooted. Silence returned, as if nothing had ever happened. In December 1997, Flight 815 was midway over the Pacific, a commercial red-eye traveling from Tokyo to Los Angeles. Most passengers slept as clouds, and black ocean stretched endlessly outside. In seat 33A, near the rear of the aircraft, Daniel Pierce sat wide awake, returning from a business trip. While reading a worn paperback, he noticed something unusual through the window. A light appeared, unlike any star closer, moving perfectly alongside the plane. It was a dull orange sphere, like heated metal, pulsing gently as if breathing. Soon, 3 more joined in a triangular formation, gliding just below the wing level. Strangely, no turbulence or sound accompanied these objects. The cabin remained eerily quiet. A low, deep hum resonated from within his chest. Daniel scanned the area. No one else stirred. Flight attendants and passengers seemed frozen in time. The window lights began shifting, not in shape but in colors, soft, impossible gradients of red and violet. Suddenly, a figure materialized beside him. Tall, unmoving, with smooth, pale skin and eyes that reflected no light. It didn't turn or speak, yet Daniel felt a word enter his mind: observe. In an instant, everything returned to normal. Cabin lights glowed, passengers snored, and flight attendants moved through the aisles. The mysterious lights had vanished. Daniel's book lay closed, a bookmark tucked into an unread page. Upon landing, he remained silent. Later, while reviewing his notes, something felt different changed, yet undefined. Walter's experience followed a similar pattern of unexplained events. After his encounter, he left his post the next morning, never to return. His logs were found intact, with a final page covered in dozens of hand-sketched circles, each shaded differently, each marked with the same cryptic note. Not fog, not sea, not a local fishermen still speak of how quickly the fog can arrive, and when it does, the gulls fall silent. In 1989, in the quiet hills of Córdoba province, Argentina, a lone farmhouse stood at the edge of an empty field. The red tin roof and old windmill had been part of the Velasco family's home for generations. By then, only Rosa the Lasco remained, a retired school teacher in her 70s who lived simply with her garden, a few chickens, and her black dog, Matil. One early spring night, everything changed. A sharp sound like static from an old radio caught her attention as she was drifting off to sleep. Mateo growled from the foot of the bed. She sat up and pulled back the curtain, revealing the nearly full moon and something extraordinary beyond. Flickering orbs moved with strange fluid precision just above the field. Not lanterns, not headlights, but something entirely different. They seemed to be searching, weaving through the darkness. Her garden was glowing with a bluish light that cast long, odd shadows across the fence. The air felt heavy, charged like the moment before lightning. 2 figures emerged. Thin and taller than men, their skin pale gray-blue like polished stone, they stood perfectly still beyond her vegetables. Rosa froze. Mateo didn't bark, only whimpering low and frightened. Though the figures said nothing, Rosa felt something. A thought, perhaps a memory that wasn't hers. A street she'd never seen. A voice she didn't recognize. Suddenly, the windmill stopped turning. The orbs blinked out one by one. The figures turned in unison and walked into the tall grass. The light faded. The air returned to normal. The next morning, everything appeared unchanged, except for one remarkable detail. A vine had grown over a meter overnight. Its tomato was warm to the touch, ripe beyond reason. Rosa told no one. Years later, neighbors spoke of strange lights near the property. Some heard static by the windmill, long after Rosa had passed. And somewhere else, someone looked at their boarding stub and noticed something odd. Flight 815 had no seat 33A. The row ended at 32. There was no record of his seat ever existing. He never flew again. Sometimes, even years later, he'd wake in the middle of the night with a pressure in his ears and a soft word still echoing in his head. In the winter of 1974, Dr. Simo Ilari, a physicist from Helsinki, sought solitude in Lapland's wilderness. His destination was a remote cabin near Lake Inari, a place of snow and silence, with no electricity, just a fireplace, kerosene lamp, and radio. Ari wasn't there to rest. Notebooks in hand, he hoped isolation would sharpen his focus. Each day, he walked the frozen lake's edges. Each night, he worked by firelight, absorbed in his thoughts. But on the sixth evening, everything changed. Just after dusk, a strange hum began. Not from the radio, but vibrating through the floor and walls, low, steady, almost musical. Stepping outside, Ari expected to see a snowmobile. Instead, silence greeted him. High above the frozen lake, a pale disk of light hovered motionless. Its glow was soft, cold, casting no shadows but shimmering on the snow like moonlight beneath water. Then silence. No wind, no sound. The cold itself seemed suspended. His mechanical watch stopped. The light disk tilted, pulsed with a single white flash. He blinked, and morning had arrived. The fire was out, his tea kettle cold. 2 entire days had passed. His calendar showed time had moved forward, yet he remembered nothing. His boots were wet, as if he'd been walking through snow. His journal lay open to a new page he hadn't written. Neat rows of curved symbols stretched across the paper, with a small circle divided by a wave at the bottom. Ari left that day. He never discussed the incident publicly, but colleagues noticed a change. He abandoned theoretical physics, turning instead to sound and resonance. In private letters, he wrote of a theory called harmonic displacement, a concept no one understood. When he died in 1993, the cabin was sold, the journal remained on the shelf, the strange page untouched. Years later, a local skier reported seeing a dull ring of light above the lake. He claimed 5 minutes vanished from his watch, though the light made no sound. The mystery of that night in Lapland would remain unsolved. Lomorar, nestled in Scotland's western highlands, is among Europe's deepest freshwater lakes. Its landscape is stark and untouched deep. Hills dropping into a glassy, dark surface shrouded in fog. For centuries, local legends spoke of Morog, a mysterious creature dwelling in these waters. But in 2001, something far more unusual might have occurred beneath the surface. Duncan Fraser, a forestry worker from Fort William, was repairing fencing along the lake's eastern bank. The area was remote with dense woods limiting access. He carried minimal gear, a small tent, gas stove, and a camera typically used for wildlife photography. On his second night by the water, with a crescent moon overhead, Duncan sat drinking tea near his campfire. Suddenly, a pale glow emerged just under the water's surface. Initially mistaking it for moonlight, he realized it was moving against the current. The glow transformed. 2 round, dim lights began rotating around each other like celestial bodies. Intrigued, Duncan approached with his camera. The lights descended, then rose closer, casting a faint shimmer on nearby rocks. Everything remained eerily silent. No waves, no sound. A third light appeared, brighter and beam-like, pointing upward. Duncan felt a strange atmospheric pressure. Not fear, but a profound sense of wonder that rooted him in place. The lights accelerated, still submerged, then abruptly vanished. Come morning, no physical evidence remained. However, every photograph from that night was inexplicably blank, pure white frames with surrounding images perfectly intact. 2 days later, Duncan reported the incident to a local ranger, describing only the lights and unusual movement. The ranger's cryptic response captured the mystery. People forget how deep this lake really goes. In the years following the incident, reports emerged of peculiar occurrences on the eastern bank. Small lights glimmered beneath the water's surface. Divers encountered fish in a stunned state, yet unharmed. One experienced military-trained freediver reported hearing a low-frequency hum at 200 feet, reminiscent of an engine buried deep within rock. Despite the absence of any structures at the bottom of Lamora, the mysterious lights continue to return on certain nights, spinning and waiting just below the surface where nothing should shine. Story 14. The Transmission Tower, Montana, 1962. The winter of 1962 found a small government communications site perched alone on a snowy ridge outside Great Falls, Montana. Tower 7, a steel radio tower with a low cinder block building at its base, stood as a critical link between military installations. Typically staffed by 2 men per shift, the site's primary function was straightforward: relaying microwave signals. James Delaney, a quiet electronics expert, found himself working the midnight shift alone. His partner had been unexpectedly reassigned, leaving him to maintain the equipment solo. On his third night of solitude, everything changed. Around 2:15 a.m., a precise, steady frequency began seeping through the building's receiver. This was no ordinary interference or static. James checked the readouts, finding nothing unusual. The tone didn't correspond to any active channels, and when he attempted to isolate it, the entire console dimmed. The tower lights flickered. Stepping outside into the freezing wind, James encountered an eerie stillness. Above the ridge, approximately 30 feet above the tower's tip, a dull, matte black object hovered silently. Perfectly disc-shaped and featureless, it remained motionless for nearly 2 minutes. Suddenly, a beam of red light extended from its underside. Unlike a typical projection, this light stretched directly across the air, connecting to the tower's top. The tone returned, now louder and emanating from the object itself. It vibrated through the metal, the soil, and James's very chest. As quickly as it appeared, the light vanished. The disc tilted slowly, turned without a sound, and disappeared into the night sky in a smooth, horizontal blur. No arc, no trail, simply gone. Returning inside, James found the equipment dead. Backup systems refused to engage, and when technicians arrived the next day, they discovered every recording mysteriously wiped clean. In a small village outside Samarkand, Uzbekistan, a story lived in whispers for years, never officially acknowledged. It was a place of quiet farms and expansive skies where children played freely and elders watched life move slowly. Amina, a 10-year-old shy girl, often wandered the meadows behind her family's home. Late one April afternoon, she walked toward the field's edge with her notebook and pencil, her usual habit of drawing birds and clouds. When evening came and Amina didn't return, her older brother burst into the house, pale and breathless. He'd seen something extraordinary. Amina floating upright, arms at her sides, suspended 10 feet above the ground, completely motionless. Her parents initially dismissed it as a child's imagination or a trick, but when they and several neighbors rushed to the field, they witnessed the impossible. Directly above Amina hovered a perfect silver sphere, smooth, metallic, unmarked. It hung silently as if connected by an invisible thread. Witnesses later described an unnatural silence, as if sound itself had been removed. Amina remained calm, her eyes open and focused on something unseen. Her gaze was steady, unafraid. Without warning, the sphere pulsed once and began to rise. Amina followed, ascending slowly. At 20 feet, her body seemed to shimmer. Then, just as gently, she was lowered back to the ground. The moment her feet touched earth, the sphere vanished. No trail, no flash, just empty sky. This was the story of the floating girl, a moment that defied explanation in the quiet fields of Uzbekistan. Amina blinked, looked around, and asked why everyone was staring. She remembered nothing. No sound, no floating, no silver light. To this day, the locals remember that afternoon. Some say it was a miracle, others something else. But all agree, nothing that silent should ever come from above. She lived a long, quiet life and never showed signs of trauma. Doctors found nothing wrong with her. Yet she often claimed she dreamed of shapes, perfect glowing spheres, and felt most at peace when walking near the edge of the fields under a wide, empty sky. It was the fall of 1980, along a quiet stretch of Route 13 in rural Virginia. Just after midnight, 2 highway workers reported a strange sight. A tall, narrow pane of glass stood upright on the side of the road. A mirror without a frame or stand, nearly 6 feet tall. When they got closer, something was off. The mirror reflected only darkness behind them, not the headlights. Michael stepped in front of it, but saw no reflection, just a road continuing endlessly. Not the real one, but a version that curved sharply into a pine grove that didn't exist. Fog rolled across the mirror's surface. Shapes moved in the distance, tall, thin, walking slowly across this false highway. No faces, no lights, just shadows that paused occasionally, as if listening. Leon reached out and touched the surface. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It had no temperature at all. Then the mirror shimmered slightly, like heat rising off asphalt. A sharp tone rang out, brief and piercing, like metal scraped across metal. The shapes in the reflection turned slowly, all at once, as if they had noticed the watchers. Michael stepped back. Leon didn't. He was frozen, staring into the mirror, eyes wide. For just a moment, Michael saw Leon's reflection, not beside him but deep within the mirrored road, walking into that strange pine grove. Michael grabbed his arm, pulled him away. The mirror vanished. Not shattered, not moved, just gone. There was no sound, no flash. The road was empty again. Leon collapsed. When he woke, he remembered nothing. But he never went near Route 13 again. A patch of wilderness in the remote highlands of central Tasmania, far from towns and coastal roads, holds a story that few have witnessed. In 2010, researchers Emily and Theo were conducting a biodiversity survey, camping deep in an area known for steep ridges and thick eucalyptus forests where hikers rarely venture. Their third evening took an unexpected turn when an inexplicable silence descended on the valley. The usual forest sounds, insects, birds, and breeze through trees, abruptly ceased. The air grew dense and still. On the ridgeline above them, 3 figures appeared, standing motionless. Initially, they seemed like hikers, but something was distinctly off. The figures were unnaturally tall, perfectly still, arms hanging at their sides, facing directly down toward the campsite. Theo called out, but no response came. Using binoculars, they discovered something chilling. The figures had no faces. Smooth, featureless heads of pale bare skin replaced what should have been eyes and mouths. Hours passed. The figures remained unchanged, watching. Emily and Theo took turns observing this bizarre scene. By midnight, nothing had shifted. The atmosphere felt compressed, wrong. When Theo tried to use a satellite phone, it refused to power on. Around 2 a.m., the campfire dimmed, not from lack of fuel, but as if light itself was being absorbed. Then came a sound, not from the forest, but from inside their heads. A low internal hum vibrated, building pressure behind their eyes. The figures began to move, but not walking. They slid effortlessly down the ridge in a straight line, their posture never changing. The following week, Michael returned alone to the area. He found no trace of the mirror, but swore he saw a new curve forming in the woods where no road had ever been. Locals still speak of the phantom turn, claiming that if you drive that stretch after midnight, your headlights might catch a tall glass shape just off the shoulder. And if you look too long, you might see the road going somewhere it shouldn't. The farm sat nestled in the rural fields outside Vinnytsia, Ukraine, a quiet place untouched by politics or cities. For generations, the Kenko family had worked its soil, watching wheat, sunflowers, and barley sway under golden sunsets. But in the autumn of 1987, something changed. It began with silence. One morning, Pavel Kulino, the family's eldest son, noticed an unnatural stillness. No birds sang. No dogs barked in the distance. The wheat stalks stood motionless, stripped of their usual whispers. His father Miki was in the barn sharpening tools when the world transformed. First came the light. A pulsing blue glow, like moonlight trapped in water, poured across the fields from above. Sourceless and beamless, it was simply a presence. The barn rafters glowed and the horses froze in a trance-like state. Mikhail walked outside and stopped. 15 feet above the wheat, an object hovered. Oval-shaped and dark at its center, it was ringed by slow-turning pale light that shimmered like glass. It didn't move. It didn't hum. It simply existed in utter silence. Time itself seemed to stretch. Standing on the porch, Pavel watched his father's movements slow as if moving through syrup. A drop of sweat paused halfway down his cheek. The wind halted. Dust hung suspended like snow. Inside the house, clocks stopped ticking. Then came a sound, rising not from the sky but from the ground. A low, deep resonance trembled through the earth, like the groan of something vast awakening beneath the soil. The wheat bent outward, pushed by invisible hands away from the object above. Just as suddenly, it ended. The object vanished. The glow disappeared. Birds returned. Across the house, clocks ticked forward again. Exactly 3 minutes lost. In the winter of 1953, a bush pilot named Raymond Cross flew a routine supply drop to Akatuk, a remote fishing village on the western Alaskan coast. Home to fewer than 50 people, this tight-knit Inwood community lived simply and deliberately isolated. Raymond had been flying there for 5 years, familiar with every detail, the faces, the dogs, the way smoke curled from chimneys before his skis touched the ice. But this time, something was wrong. No smoke, no movement, no sound. He circled twice before landing on the snow-packed inlet. As his plane slowed, he looked toward the village and saw nothing. Houses stood in place. Boats lined the shore. Yet no one came to greet him, not even the dogs. The silence was total. Raymond walked up the main path, calling out, no response. Doors hung open. A stew sat on a fire pit long gone cold. Clothing dangled on lines frozen in the wind. No people, no footprints in the fresh snow, no signs of struggle. Just absence. Inside the schoolhouse, he discovered something strange. Chairs had been moved to the center of the room, arranged in a perfect spiral. On the chalkboard, an unrecognizable circle filled with lines and dots. The chalk had snapped mid-stroke, still lying on the floor. He found a radio and tried to call for help. The signal was garbled, not static, but rhythmic pulses like sonar or breathing. Raymond stayed less than an hour. He flew to Nome, filed a report, and returned days later with state authorities. By then, snow had covered most of the village. No bodies were ever found, no evacuation signs, no tracks leading away. Just a town frozen in midlife. The government dismissed it as a migration event, unstable ice, or an unreported emergency. But Raymond knew better. He'd been there. He'd felt the quiet. Meanwhile, McCall would never speak again. He lived another 20 years in perfect health, never uttering a word. He didn't seem frightened, just quiet, peaceful, like someone who'd heard something so final, so vast, there was simply nothing left to say. To this day, the Kenko farm grows sunflowers taller than anywhere else in the region. Locals say the soil remembers, even if no one talks about what happened in those 3 missing minutes. In 1971, the Soviet Navy operated a covert listening station on the desolate Arctic island of Nova Zelia, a place known for nuclear testing, brutal cold, and long stretches of total winter darkness. Only military personnel and research teams inhabited this remote location. That year, engineers began drilling a tunnel beneath the permafrost to expand their underground storage. The work proceeded smoothly at first. Careful excavation, reinforced steel supports, and regular progress reports. Then, just past 90 meters, the drill team broke through something unexpected. They discovered a naturally formed cavity, smooth, symmetrical, and dry, despite the surrounding frost. It wasn't marked on any geological survey. The chamber was perfectly quiet, with no cracks or signs of erosion. A team of geophysicists descended with lights, meters, and sensors to investigate. Strangely, their equipment began failing one by one. Lights dimmed, batteries drained, the air remained breathable but unnaturally still, as if sound itself resisted movement. At the chamber's center stood a stone platform, unremarkable yet somehow wrong. Smooth, rectangular, and warm to the touch, a junior officer named Morzevavi placed his hand on the stone and instantly collapsed. He remained in a coma for 11 days before waking without any memory. Afterward, Marzov wrote obsessively in an unidentifiable language, using curved symbols and long, repeating sequences. He refused food for weeks, speaking only one word when prompted. He was transferred to a remote facility, and records trail off from there. The chamber was sealed, the project halted. All involved were relocated or reassigned. Officially, the site was decommissioned due to seismic instability. Unofficially, guards remained posted at the entrance until the late 1980s. Years later, he spoke about it only once. He described the air as feeling watched, like standing on a stage with a curtain just beginning to lift. The village remains abandoned to this day. Some say if you walk its parts after nightfall, you'll hear footsteps that never quite catch up to you. Others claim those footsteps have already caught up. The summer of 1998 brought an unsettling encounter for Carl Hensley, a retired lineman near McCall, Idaho. His usual hike through an overgrown service road by the Pate National Forest took an unexpected turn that evening. Everything felt different. As he approached a clearing where an old radio tower had once stood, a strange sensation overtook him. His ears began to ring, not a sharp pain, but a dull static-like hum. Instinctively, he checked his handheld FM radio. Nothing. Just white noise across every band. The clearing ahead started to glow subtly, almost imperceptibly. Dry, charged air buzzed around him. His arm hairs stood on end. At the center of the field, amid tall wild grass, something moved. Not an animal, but a shape. Tall, slim, and indistinct, like a haze or smoke. It swayed without wind or sound. More figures appeared. Kapal called out. The static intensified. Carl stepped forward, just 10 feet from the nearest figure. He saw no face, no color. Only a human-like outline flickering like a broken television signal, existing between moments. Time seemed to stop. The static ceased. All figures turned toward Carl simultaneously. He couldn't move. His legs felt heavy, as if underwater. The air thickened. His watch stopped. The radio hissed and died. One final shimmer, and the figures vanished. Weeks later, Carl returned with a friend. The field had transformed. Overgrown knots pressed downward in a perfect circle. No plants, no insects, just scorched earth and a faint ozone scent. They found no record of a tower ever existing in that location. Carl kept his silence about what happened that night, a strange encounter that defied explanation. Paul Keener moved into a rental property on the outskirts of Espanola, New Mexico in 2005. The modest adobe house stood on a quiet desert patch, far from town noise, cheap and private. A windowless side room painted a deep, unnatural blue caught his attention. The landlord called it a storage nook, and Paul used it for boxes, tools, and an old reading chair. Initially, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then the dreams started. They weren't nightmares, just intensely vivid experiences. A voice whispering numbers. A slow-turning object suspended in air. A sensation of weightlessness and vast, silent distance. Each time he'd wake precisely at 3:33 a.m. without fear, just a sense of something undefined. Cold spots began to emerge. The blue room remained 15-day cooler than the rest of the house, and Paul noticed the walls felt damp some mornings, though no actual moisture was ever discovered. One night, he left a portable recorder in the room. Hours of white noise were interrupted at 3:33 a.m. by a soft mechanical click, like a distant switch being thrown underground. The next day, the chair had rotated to face the opposite direction. Neighbors shared unsettling details about the house's history. It had been vacant for nearly a decade, with previous tenants leaving within months. Some didn't even collect their deposits. Bad dreams, one neighbor mumbled along with strange mirror reflections. Paul began feeling watched, but only in the blue room. One sleepless night, he sat in the chair with the door slightly ajar, lights extinguished, waiting. At 3:33 a.m., an unnatural glow filled the space. Not from a bulb or outside source, but as if seeping through the walls. For a brief moment, the room's far side seemed deeper, like a tunnel had opened just beyond perception. Then it vanished. A week later, Paul moved out. He never unpacked his boxes or retrieved his deposit. Instead, he left a cryptic note in the mailbox for the next tenant. Don't. I apologize, but the text you've provided seems to be an incomplete or unclear instruction fragment. Could you please share the full text or script you would like me to rewrite? Without the complete context, I cannot effectively restructure the paragraph or maintain its original meaning.